What do you do when the woman who chose money over you, the woman who signed the divorce papers without crying, who walked into a life of private jets and diamond rings, shows up at your apartment at midnight in a pale blue dress, asking you to cook pasta? Do you let her in? Nolan Pierce did. And that single decision, that one quiet, stupid, tender moment of opening a door he should have kept locked, changed everything. If you've ever loved someone who left, stay with me. Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. The thing about Denver in late October was that it got cold fast and without apology. One evening, the air still tasted like autumn, dry leaves and something faintly sweet, the kind of weather that made you want to leave your window cracked. Then midnight arrived, and it was just cold, sharp, the kind that found the gap between your collar and your jaw and stayed there. Nolan Pierce had been awake since 11:30, not because he couldn't sleep, but because Maisie had kicked off her blanket again, and he'd gone in to fix it and then just stood there for a while, watching her sleep. She was 5 years old and she slept the way she did everything else, with total commitment, one arm thrown over her face, mouth slightly open. He'd tucked the blanket back around her shoulders and stood there for longer than made sense, and he didn't know why, except that sometimes he just needed to see her. He'd come back to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water he didn't drink, and was standing at the counter looking at nothing when the knock came. Not a doorbell. A knock. 3 times. Quiet, like whoever was on the other side wasn't sure they should be there. He looked at the clock on the microwave. 12:04 a.m. His first thought was his neighbor Carl, who was 72 and occasionally locked himself out. His second thought was that something was wrong. His third thought, the one he immediately pushed away, was a thought he had no business having. He walked to the door and looked through the peephole, and there she was. Celeste. Celeste Varden, wearing a pale blue dress that had no business being worn in 40-degree weather, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, standing under the yellow cone of his porch light, with her arms slightly crossed over her chest, not hugging herself, more like she was just trying to figure out what to do with her hands. Nolan stood at the door for 4 full seconds without moving. He thought about not opening it. He genuinely considered it. He put his hand on the deadbolt and just held it there, and he thought, this is the kind of moment people describe later as the moment everything changed, and you only get to choose once. He opened the door. "Hey," Celeste said. Her voice was the same. That was the first thing that hit him. Not how she looked, not the dress, not the fact that she was standing at his door at midnight. It was her voice, slightly low, slightly careful, like she was always measuring the weight of what she was about to say. "Hey," Nolan said. They looked at each other. He noticed she'd been crying, not recently. The evidence was older than that. The faint redness under her eyes mostly faded now, but it had been there. "I know it's late," she said. "It's midnight, Celeste." "I know." "Maisie's asleep." "I know that too," she exhaled. "I'm not here for... I didn't come to cause anything. I just..." She stopped, started over. "I was driving and I ended up here and I know how that sounds." "It sounds like something you thought about for a while before you got in the car." She looked at him and didn't deny it. He stepped back from the door. Not all the way, just enough to make a question out of it, a narrow invitation she'd have to decide on herself. She stepped inside. Nolan's apartment wasn't embarrassing, but it wasn't much either. 800 square feet in a building on Federal Boulevard that had been renovated just enough to justify a slightly higher rent, and not enough to actually fix anything. The kitchen was small, the living room was a couch, and a rug, and a shelf of Maisie's books, and the whole place smelled faintly of the dinner he'd made 6 hours ago. Garlic, olive oil, something warm. Celeste stood in the middle of it and looked around in a way that wasn't quite like she was judging it, more like she was reading it, like she was taking inventory of who he'd become in the 3 years since she'd last stood in a room with him. "You moved the couch," she said. 2 years ago. "The plant's new." Maisie named it Gerald. Something moved across her face. Not quite a smile, but close to one. She was still holding herself slightly tight, arms crossed again, and she was standing in the middle of the room like she wasn't sure she'd earned the right to sit down yet. You want something to drink? He asked. No. Then, maybe water. He got her water. She took it and held it and didn't drink it, and he leaned against the counter and watched her not drink it and waited. I'm going to ask you something, she said, and I need you to not make it into a big thing. Okay. I want to make the pasta. He looked at her. The one we used to make, she said. The Sunday pasta. I know it's midnight, and I know that's... She pressed her lips together. I just want to cook something. With you. Like we used to, just once. The Sunday pasta. He knew exactly what she meant. It wasn't a recipe from anywhere, not a dish with a real name. It was just the thing they used to make on Sunday nights when they were 26 and 27 and newly married and convinced they'd figured something out. Garlic and olive oil and whatever vegetables looked good at the store, tossed with rigatoni and a handful of Parmesan and too much black pepper. They'd made it maybe 100 times in the kitchen of the apartment they used to share, the one on Colfax with the broken radiator and the window that faced the parking lot. It had been their ritual without them ever deciding it was. He should have said no, he knew that. Standing there in his kitchen at 12 after midnight, looking at his ex-wife in her pale blue dress, he knew with the particular clarity that arrives too late that the right answer was no. Celeste, it's midnight. Go home. Go back to Grant Ellison and your engagement ring and the life you chose. Go back to that. Okay, he said. She knew where he kept things without asking. That was the part that got to him. He'd expected it to be awkward, expected them to bump around each other in the small kitchen, expected the silences to have weight. And the silences did have weight, but not the uncomfortable kind. They had the weight of things that used to be familiar. She found the olive oil on the second shelf without looking. She opened the correct cabinet for the pasta without hesitating. When she held up 2 different boxes of rigatoni and raised an eyebrow at him, he pointed to the one on the left, and she nodded like that was obvious. You still have the big pan, she said, pulling it from the cabinet under the stove. It's a good pan. It's the pan we got at that estate sale in Boulder. That old woman tried to charge us $40 for it. It's worth $40. You paid $22. She started at $40. Celeste set the pan on the stove, and for just a moment, just a single breath, she smiled. A real one. Small, but real. He started the garlic. There's something that happens when you cook with someone you used to love, when you've cooked with them enough times that the choreography is still in your body somewhere. He didn't tell her to start the water, she just did it. She didn't tell him how much oil, she just watched his hand and made a small sound of approval. When he burned the first piece of garlic, he always burned the first piece. Some things don't change. She made the same noise she'd always made, this quiet breath of exasperation that wasn't really exasperation, and said, every single time, and he said, it's just the one piece, and she said, it's always just the one piece. And somehow that was the moment the tightness in the room finally loosened. They stood side by side at the stove and the old rhythm came back. Not all of it. There were gaps, places where things should have fit and didn't quite, but enough. Enough that the silence between words felt easy instead of heavy. How is she? Celeste asked. She was slicing mushrooms with the focused attention she gave things when she was being careful. Maisie? Good. Really good. She's in kindergarten now. I know, your mom told me. He looked at her. You talk to my mom? Sometimes. She kept her eyes on the mushrooms. She doesn't tell me much. I don't ask for much. But she's not trying to keep me informed. I don't want you to think that. I just asked once how Maisie was doing, and she told me. He didn't know how he felt about that. He filed it away. She's doing really well, he said. She's reading already, which apparently is a big deal. Her teacher sends me these little notes about it. She read a whole picture book out loud to her class last week, and her teacher said she didn't miss a single word. Celeste stopped slicing for a second, just a second. She gets that from you, she said. You always read everything out loud. I don't read things out loud. You absolutely do. The menu at restaurants, directions. You do this thing where you mouth the words even when you're not saying them. He opened his mouth to argue and then closed it because he wasn't sure she was wrong. The pasta water started to boil. He added salt. Too much, because that was how they'd always done it. salted like the sea, some Italian grandmother's rule they'd adopted as their own. Celeste added the mushrooms to the pan, and they hissed against the hot oil. "You're happy?" he asked. He tried to make it sound neutral. He wasn't sure he succeeded. She was quiet for a moment. The mushrooms shifted in the pan. Things are moving fast," she said. He's very decisive. He knows what he wants, and he moves toward it. There's a security in that." Nolan waited. "The engagement party is next month," she said. 400 people. His side mostly. I don't actually know most of them." "That sounds like a lot." "It is." She turned the mushrooms with a wooden spoon. "He's already talking about the wedding. Venice, a palazzo, photographer from New York. He's thorough." "That's a word for it." She glanced at him sideways. "I'm not here to complain about Grant." "I know. I'm not." "I believe you." She didn't say anything for a moment, then quietly, "He's a good man." Nolan added the pasta to the water. He watched it sink and then rise and said nothing. They ate at his small kitchen table at 1 in the morning. There were no candles, no atmosphere, just the overhead light and 2 mismatched forks, and the pasta in the big pan set in the middle of the table between them. Celeste had found the Parmesan in the back of the refrigerator and grated too much of it over both their bowls, which had also always been how they'd done it. And then, reaching past the pan for the pepper, her hand stopped. She'd seen the mug. It was sitting on the second shelf of the open cabinet above the counter. A faded blue-rimmed mug, the kind you got at a thrift store, small enough that it looked a little ridiculous next to regular cups. The rim was blue and slightly uneven, like whoever had painted it had been going a little fast. There was a small chip on the handle that had been there since approximately the second week they'd owned it. Celeste had bought that mug from a yard sale on a Sunday morning the year they were married. She'd paid 50 cents for it and presented it to him like it was a prize. "You need a coffee mug that doesn't have a logo on it," she'd said. "Here. This one has personality. It has a chip. That's the personality." She was still staring at it. "You kept it," she said. It's a good mug." She looked at him, and something shifted in her face that he couldn't quite read and didn't want to try too hard to. "Yeah," she said. "It is." She picked up her fork. He picked up his. They ate, and the overhead light was a little too bright, and the pasta was right. Not perfect. There was slightly too much pepper, and the mushrooms were a little soft. But right. The way things that are made from memory are right, with all the imperfections of the original built in. He didn't ask her what this meant. She didn't tell him. They ate and talked about small things. Maisie's teacher, a book she'd been reading, a neighborhood in Denver that was changing, and it was almost like nothing had been broken. But things had been broken, and they both knew that. She left at 2:15. She paused at the door and turned back, and he thought for a moment she was going to say something significant, something that would require him to have an answer ready. She said, "The garlic was better this time. I only burned 1 piece. You always burn 1 piece. It's the first piece. It seasons the oil. That's not a thing. It's absolutely a thing." She shook her head, and the almost smile was back, and then she stepped out into the October cold, and he stood at the door and watched her walk to her car. A dark sedan he didn't recognize, rental maybe, or new, and she didn't look back. He closed the door. He stood in the kitchen for a long time after that. The pan was still on the stove. The 2 bowls were in the sink. The Parmesan wrapper was on the counter. The overhead light was still on. The mug was on the shelf where it had always been. He washed the dishes slowly, carefully, not thinking about anything in particular or trying not to. He dried the pan and put it away. He wiped down the counter. He turned off the light. He went to Maisie's room and she'd kicked the blanket off again, and he tucked it back around her shoulders, and she made a small sound in her sleep and turned her face toward the wall. He went to bed. He didn't sleep for a very long time. The second visit came 11 days later. He told himself it was a one-time thing, a moment of weakness on her part. Maybe a fight with Grant, maybe the pressure of the engagement getting to her, and she'd wanted something familiar, and now it was done, and things would go back to normal. His normal. Small apartment, Maisie's kindergarten art projects on the refrigerator, Work at the architecture firm where he was neither rising quickly nor falling, just steady, doing good work on buildings that other people got excited about. His life was small, and he'd made peace with that. The smallness was also the realness of it, and he'd stopped apologizing for the difference. 11 days later, there was a knock at his door at 7:30 in the evening, earlier this time, a more respectable hour. And when he opened it, she was standing there with a paper bag and a look on her face like she'd prepared a reason and was hoping he wouldn't push too hard on it. "I was in the neighborhood," she said. He looked at the bag. "What's in the bag?" "Mushrooms. And I got a better kind of rigatoni, the bronze cut kind. It holds the sauce better." "You were in the neighborhood." "I was running errands." "In this neighborhood." The farmer's market closes late on Thursdays. There was no farmer's market within 6 blocks that he knew of. He didn't say this. He stepped back from the door. "Maisie's awake," he said. "She'll be up for another hour." Celeste went still for just a second. "I don't have to." "She asks about you sometimes," he said. He hadn't planned to say that. "Not a lot. She was 2 when you—" He stopped, reorganized. "She doesn't really remember, but she sees pictures at my mom's and she asks who the pretty lady is." Celeste's face did something complicated. "What do you tell her?" she asked. "The truth. That you're someone Daddy used to know very well." He paused. "Come in, Celeste." "What?" Maisie was sitting at the kitchen table with a coloring book when Celeste came in, and she looked up with the complete and total lack of social self-consciousness that only belongs to 5-year-olds. "Who are you?" Maisie asked. "My name's Celeste." Maisie considered this. "That's a pretty name." "Thank you. I like yours too." "Maisie." Maisie looked at her father. "She knows my name, Daddy." "She does." "How?" "Because I told her about you," Nolan said. Maisie accepted this with a nod, which was one of the things he loved most about her. She accepted explanations at face value, filed them, moved on. "Do you know how to color?" she asked Celeste. "I do." "You can color with me if you want. I'm doing a horse." Celeste sat down at the kitchen table and picked up a brown crayon and colored a horse with a 5-year-old she had never met, and Nolan stood in the kitchen doorway and watched and felt something move through his chest that he did not fully examine. Later, after Maisie was in bed, they made pasta again. And after that, the visits kept coming. It became a thing without them ever deciding it was a thing. Once every week, sometimes twice. She always arrived with some excuse. The neighborhood, a delivery she'd been making nearby, a craving she couldn't explain. The excuses got thinner each time, more perfunctory, like she was only offering them out of politeness, and they both knew it. She never stayed the night. She never mentioned Grant without him being brought up first. She sat in his kitchen and cooked and talked and played with Maisie when Maisie was awake. And when Maisie was asleep, they sat at the small table and talked about things that had nothing to do with what was happening and things that had everything to do with it. One evening in November, she told him that the engagement party had been moved to December and that she'd been asked to approve a seating chart that had 412 names on it, and she knew maybe 60 of them. "Why 60?" he asked. "That's how many I've met. In 2 years." She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug, the blue-rimmed one, which she'd started using without comment, without acknowledgement, like she'd always used it. "He has a lot of connections, Nolan. That's what he calls them. Connections. Not friends. Connections." "Do you have friends? Other than—" He stopped. "Other than what?" "I was going to say other than me, and then I realized I don't know if that's—" "You're my friend," she said, like it was a fact that had already been established somewhere and didn't need much discussion. "You're the only person I talk to where I don't feel like I'm—" She pressed her lips together, tried again. "With Grant's world, there's always a register to it. You say the right thing or you say the wrong thing. I'm always performing slightly, even with the people who are supposed to be on my side. Even with his sister, who actually likes me, I think, even with her, I'm aware of how I'm coming across. You never used to care how you came across." She looked at him. "I know." Something tired in her eyes. "I used to say whatever I thought. I used to be—" She shook her head. "I was a lot, Nolan. I know I was a lot." "You were," he said. "But you were also real." She turned the mug in her hands. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what real means. Lately." He didn't push it. She wasn't ready for wherever that sentence ended, and he could feel it. Some things you had to let people arrive at themselves. "The pasta's better with the bronze cut," he said. She looked up. "I told you." "You were right." "Write that down." "You never admit when I'm right." "I admit when you're right all the time." "Name one time." "The mug." "That was my choice. You didn't admit anything. You just used it." "My using it was admitting it." She shook her head, but she was smiling. A real one again. The kind that reached her eyes, the kind he remembered from Sundays on Colfax, from late mornings and bad coffee, and a radiator that clanged twice a day, and a life that didn't have 412 names on a seating chart. Outside, Denver had gone properly cold. The window above the sink was fogged slightly at the corners. And for a little while, in that kitchen, under that light, with the mug on the shelf and the pasta in the pan, and Maisie asleep in the next room, for a little while, it felt almost like something whole. But Nolan knew better than to say that out loud. Some things, named too early, don't survive the naming. What he didn't know, what he was only beginning to understand without the words for it yet, was that Celeste was carrying something she hadn't told anyone. He noticed things. He was a person who noticed things. It was part of what made him good at his job, reading space, reading scale, understanding what a structure was actually doing underneath what it appeared to be doing. And he noticed that Celeste sometimes pressed her hand against her stomach in a way that was slightly too deliberate, that she'd turned down wine twice without offering an explanation when she'd always been someone who enjoyed a glass with dinner, that there were shadows under her eyes that weren't entirely from the pressures of an engagement she didn't seem to want to talk about. He noticed. He didn't ask. He told himself it wasn't his place. He was wrong about that, as it turned out. But not yet. Not here. One Thursday in late November, Maisie asked Celeste when she was coming back. They were at the door, coats on, Maisie holding Nolan's hand in the particular death grip she reserved for moments when she was trying to delay bedtime by proximity to an interesting adult. She'd spent the last 40 minutes showing Celeste her drawings, a series of family portraits that featured Nolan, Gerald, the plant, a large yellow blob that was either the sun or a dog, debated, and occasionally a figure with very long hair that Maisie called the pretty lady, without looking at either adult to gauge their reaction. "When are you coming back?" Maisie asked. Celeste crouched down to her level, which some adults forgot to do and some always remembered. She was always going to be one of the ones who remembered. "I don't know exactly," she said, "but I like coming here." "We like it when you come," Maisie said, with the blithe certainty of someone who has not yet learned that feelings require careful management. "Daddy smiles more." Nolan stared at the ceiling. "Does he?" Celeste said. "He doesn't always smile when it's just us. He smiles, but like—" Maisie made a regular face, neutral. "But when you're here, he smiles like this." She demonstrated a different, slightly more complicated smile. "Maisie," Nolan said. "What?" "It's true." "Okay, bedtime." "I wasn't done." "You were absolutely done." Celeste stood back up and her eyes met his, and there it was again, that thing in her face he'd been carefully not examining, like a word you know you'll eventually have to learn the meaning of. "I'll come back," she said. To Maisie, mostly. But not only. She left. Nolan got Maisie into bed, read her a chapter of a book about a rabbit who kept losing things and finding them in obvious places, turned off the lamp. "Daddy?" Maisie said from the dark. "Yeah, Bug." "I like Celeste." "Go to sleep." "I'm just saying." "I know you are. Sleep." He sat on the edge of her bed in the dark for a moment. He could hear the building making its small noises. The pipes, the elevator somewhere below them. The neighbors 2 doors down who had a dog that walked heavily. "Me too," he said quietly. Maisie was already asleep. By December, Nolan had stopped pretending to himself that this was simple. He wasn't stupid. He'd known from the moment he opened the door that October night that he was handling something with the caution it required. Not quite touching it, keeping it at arm's length, telling himself that he was just being a friend, just being human, just doing what decent people do for people they used to love. But December came and she was coming twice a week now, and Maisie had given her a drawing, the one with the long-haired figure, and Celeste had taken it home with her and not said where she was putting it, and Nolan had not asked, and neither of them had talked about what any of it meant. He was in love with her. He'd probably never stopped being in love with her. He knew this the way you know things that are inconvenient, not with drama, not with revelation, just with the quiet, exhausted certainty of a fact that has always been there, waiting for you to stop looking away from it. But she was engaged, and she was choosing something, even if she seemed less and less sure of what it was. And he had a daughter who was already saying things like "Daddy smiles more," and who had given a drawing to a woman who might disappear again, and that was the thing that actually kept him awake at night. Not his own heart, which he'd gotten used to managing, but the other heart in his apartment, the small, uncomplicated one in the next room, which had no defenses and no reason to need them. He couldn't protect Maisie and chase something at the same time. So he didn't chase. He opened his door when she knocked. He made pasta. He passed the parmesan. He watched her hold the blue-rimmed mug like it grounded her somehow. And he waited, without quite knowing what he was waiting for, until the night he didn't have to wait anymore. But that came with a cost that neither of them had seen coming. And it arrived at his door not gently, not with a knock, but with the particular violence of a man who believed everything could be owned if you paid enough for it. But that was still ahead. For now, there was just the kitchen, the pan, the overhead light, two people moving around each other in a space that was too small for what they were carrying, learning the weight of it slowly, together. The mug on the shelf, the pasta on the stove, and Maisie's drawing, the pretty lady with the long hair, sitting somewhere in a house across the city, in a room that Nolan had never seen, doing the quiet work of being proof. The December engagement party invitation arrived at Nolan's firm on a Tuesday. He knew it wasn't sent to him personally. It was addressed to the firm, to the principal architect, because Ellison Development had done 2 projects with Morrison and Pierce in the last 4 years, and Grant Ellison sent invitations to everyone he'd ever written a check to. It was that kind of party, that kind of man. The invitation was heavy cream card stock with gold foil lettering and the kind of font that cost money to license, and it sat on the corner of his desk for 2 days before he threw it in the recycling bin without opening the envelope all the way. His colleague Dana saw him do it. "Was that what I think it was?" she asked. "Probably. The Ellison engagement party. I got one too. Are you going?" "No." Dana looked at him for a moment with the particular expression she used when she knew more than she was letting on. Dana was 41 and had been married twice and had the kind of perceptiveness that came from paying close attention to other people's mistakes. "Okay," she said, and went back to her drafting board. He appreciated that about her, the okay that didn't push. That evening, Celeste texted him for the first time. Not a call, a text, which felt like a new threshold they were crossing without discussing it. "I know you got the invitation. You don't have to come. I just wanted to say that." He looked at the message for a while. "I wasn't going to," he wrote back. "I know," she replied. And then, after a pause long enough that he'd set the phone down, "I'm not sure I want to go either." He picked the phone back up, looked at that, put it down again without answering, because there wasn't an answer to that wasn't going to cost one of them something. The party happened on a Saturday. He knew because his mother called him that afternoon to ask if he was doing anything that night, which was her way of checking on him without admitting she was checking on him. His mother, Patricia, was a retired high school English teacher who had liked Celeste before the divorce and had somehow continued liking Celeste after it, which was either generous or a specific kind of torture, depending on the day. "I'm fine, Mom," he said. "Maisie and I are watching a movie." "What movie?" "The one about the dog." "You're going to have to narrow that down." "The animated one. She's seen it 4 times. I've seen it 4 times. We're going to watch it again." "That sounds nice." "It's fine." "Mom." "I didn't say anything." "You were about to." There was a small pause. "She called me," Patricia said. "Celeste, last week. She asked about Maisie's school." Nolan was quiet. "She sounded tired," Patricia said. "Not sad tired, more like like she was running a race she signed up for before she knew how long it was. Another pause. Yes, exactly like that. His mother let that sit. Then, you be careful, sweetheart. I'm being careful. Being careful and being smart are different things. Mom, I'm not saying anything else. Enjoy the dog movie. She hung up. He sat on the couch with the phone in his hand and Maisie beside him, already holding the remote, already completely unbothered by the complicated machinery of the adult world, which was a gift she had and would eventually lose, and he was in no hurry to take from her. Ready? She asked. Yeah, Bug, I'm ready. She pressed play. The movie started. He watched approximately none of it. Celeste showed up the following Thursday, which was her pattern now, so Thursdays had become the reliable one, the anchor visit, with a second one midweek that was unannounced and arrived as a text 15 minutes beforehand. He'd started keeping mushrooms in the refrigerator on principle, but this Thursday she arrived later than usual, almost 8:30, and Maisie was already in bed, and she looked like the party had taken something out of her that hadn't come back yet. She didn't say the party. She just came in and sat down at the kitchen table in her coat, and he poured her water and put the kettle on because she'd mentioned once, months ago, that she'd started drinking less coffee after 6, and he'd filed that away and hadn't examined why. You look tired, he said. I am tired. How was... He stopped. You can ask, she said. It's okay. How was the party? She wrapped her hands around the empty mug, which she'd pulled to her side of the table automatically. It was very beautiful. Everything was perfect. The flowers were perfect. The food was perfect. The lighting was perfect. Grant's event planner is extraordinary. She should run a small country. He waited. And I stood there for 4 hours in a $6,000 dress, smiling at people whose names I kept mixing up, and Grant held my hand in this way he does, where... She stopped. Started over. He holds my hand in public sometimes, and it's very deliberate, like he's making sure everyone can see where his hand is. You know what I mean? Like a flag on a piece of property. She looked at him. Too far? He asked. No, she said. That's exactly what it's like. She exhaled through her nose. I spent 4 hours being a flag, and the whole time I kept thinking about... She stopped herself again. He could see her pulling back from whatever she'd been about to say, making the decision in real time to not go there. The kettle clicked off. He made her tea without asking what kind, because she'd always liked the plain black kind, even when she said she didn't, and he set it in front of her and she wrapped both hands around the mug. Not the blue one. The regular one. She'd moved the blue one to the corner of the table like she was giving it some distance tonight. Can we just cook? She said. I don't want to talk anymore. I've been talking for 4 hours and I'm empty. Can we just cook something and not talk about any of it? Yeah, he said. We can do that. They made pasta. They didn't talk much. He burned the first piece of garlic and she made the sound and said every single time. And he said it seasons the oil and she said that is not a thing. And it was so close to every other time they'd done this that it almost hurt, the familiarity of it, the way certain people fit into your rhythms like they never left. At one point, she was at the stove and he was reaching past her for the salt, and they were briefly in the same square foot of space. And she stilled slightly, and he stilled too. And then he had the salt, and he stepped back, and neither of them said anything about it. Some things didn't need to be said to be understood. It was Maisie who cracked things open, which was somehow inevitable. 2 weeks before Christmas, on a Sunday afternoon, Celeste had come by in the middle of the day for the first time, not for pasta, just for a visit, with no explanation offered and none required anymore. She'd brought a book for Maisie, a chapter book about a girl who discovers she can talk to weather, which Maisie had immediately decided was the best book she'd ever received, which she announced with the full conviction of someone who'd received perhaps 15 books in her life and considered all of them important. They were sitting on the living room floor, Maisie in the middle, Nolan and Celeste on either side. And Maisie was reading the first chapter aloud because she wanted them to hear how good it was, and Celeste was listening with her chin on her knee, her legs pulled up, her shoes off, and she looked in that moment like someone who had stopped performing anything. That was the version of her Nolan had been watching for. Not the billionaire. Not the fiancé. Just the person. Maisie stumbled on a word. Sound it out, Nolan said. Thunderos, Maisie said slowly. Thunderous. What's thunderous? Like thunder, but more so, Celeste said. Really, really loud, like the whole sky is yelling. Maisie considered this. The sky doesn't yell. Sometimes it does. Why? Because sometimes things get too big to hold quietly, Celeste said, and they have to come out loud. Maisie accepted this and went back to reading. Nolan glanced at Celeste over the top of Maisie's head, and Celeste met his eyes for just a moment before looking back down at the book. After Maisie finished the chapter and declared she was going to read the rest alone in her room, she stood up and then stopped and looked at Celeste with the directness that only the very young and the very old get away with. Are you Daddy's girlfriend? She asked. The room went very quiet. Maisie, Nolan started. I'm asking Celeste, Maisie said firmly. Celeste was looking at Maisie with an expression Nolan had never quite seen on her face before. Something careful, and also something breaking open behind the careful. Why do you ask? She said. Because you're here a lot, and you know where things are, and he smiles different. Maisie tilted her head. That's what Lily at school says a girlfriend is. Someone who's around a lot and knows where things are. Lily sounds very wise, Celeste said. She is. She's 6. She's the oldest one in our class. Maisie looked between them. So are you? We're friends, Celeste said. Very old friends who have known each other a long time. Maisie thought about this with the seriousness of an academic. Okay, she said finally, but you could be a girlfriend. Daddy's nice. He is nice, Celeste agreed. You should think about it. Maisie, Nolan said. I'm going to my room, Maisie announced, and picked up her book and left, and that was that. The silence she left behind was both the most specific and most complicated silence of the past 2 months. Nolan and Celeste were still sitting on the floor. Neither of them moved for a moment. I'm sorry, he said. Don't be. Celeste was looking at the hallway where Maisie had disappeared. She's wonderful, Nolan. She's genuinely... Her voice caught slightly. Not enough to be called crying, just enough to be honest. She's wonderful. She is. He paused. She's also, as you have now witnessed, deeply committed to saying out loud whatever she is thinking. I wonder where she gets that. Not from me. No, not from you. She looked at him. You never say what you're thinking. I say enough. You say things adjacent to what you're thinking. You say the neighborhood of the thought. You do this thing where you get to the edge and then you go sideways. He didn't answer because she wasn't wrong. What are you thinking right now? She asked. I'm thinking that this is a dangerous question, he said. That's a sidestep. It's also true. She looked at him for a long moment. Outside, the Denver afternoon was doing its thing. Pale winter light, the occasional car, the sound of someone's music from another apartment somewhere above them. I'm thinking, he said carefully, that I don't know what you're doing. And I've been okay with not knowing because it wasn't my place to ask. But I have a daughter who is already attached to you, and He stopped, felt his way forward. I need to know if you're... I don't know, she said, before he'd finished, like she'd been waiting for the question and had an answer prepared, but not a clean one. I don't know what I'm doing, Nolan. I come here and I breathe, and then I go back and I stop breathing, and She pressed her fingers against the bridge of her nose. I know how unfair that is. It's not about fair. Then what is it about? It's about Maisie, he said. She's 5. She doesn't understand about people leaving. She understands about people being here, and then she'll understand about them not being here, and I can't... He exhaled. I can't let her get more attached than she already is if you're going to... I know. Celeste's voice was quiet. I know, Nolan. So I have to ask. And I need an honest answer, even if the honest answer is that you don't know yet. Just... He looked at her. What are you doing? She met his eyes, and the honesty on her face was there. He could see it, but underneath it was something else. Something she was still not ready to say. Something that had to do with the way her hand moved sometimes to her stomach. Something he hadn't asked about yet. I'm trying to figure out what I want, she said. I think... She stopped, tried again. I think I know what I want, but knowing what you want and having the courage to choose it are different things. Yeah, he said. They are. They sat there for another moment. The afternoon light shifted slightly, the way winter light does, going from pale gold to flat gray in the space of a cloud passing over the sun. I'll be more careful with Maisie, she said. I won't let her... That's not what I'm asking for. Then what are you asking for? He looked at her. I don't know either, he said, which was the truest thing he'd said out loud in months. I just needed you to know that it matters, that she matters, that this... He gestured vaguely at the apartment, the two of them on the floor, the whole recurring scene of them. This isn't just something I can keep doing without it meaning something. It means something, she said, immediately, like the words were ready before he finished. Nolan, it means... She stopped, swallowed. It means more than I know how to say right now, and I'm aware that's not good enough. It's something, he said. It's not enough. No, but it's something. Christmas that year was strange. Not bad, just strange. The kind of holiday that was made of two different things happening at once. On Christmas morning, he made Maisie blueberry pancakes, which was the tradition, and she opened her presents from under the tree, which was a small tree, 3 feet tall, which Maisie had decorated with excessive tinsel and approximately 40 ornaments, most of which were clustered on 3 branches because she'd found a system she liked. And she got the art kit she'd been asking about and immediately tried to open it before breakfast. And he made her eat the pancakes first, and she ate 3 bites and called it done. And he said, eat the whole thing. And she ate 4 more bites and called it done. And he let it go because it was Christmas. At 2 in the afternoon, his mom came over. At 4, his friend Marcus came with his wife Diane and their son Jackson, who was 6, and who Maisie regarded with the complex social calculations of someone who was not quite sure whether this person was cool enough to be interesting. The verdict by dinner was that he was acceptable. It was good. It was warm. He laughed more than he expected to. And then at 9 o'clock, after everyone had gone and Maisie was asleep with a smear of marker still on her right wrist from the art kit, his phone showed a text from Celeste. Merry Christmas. I hope it was a good one. He stood in the kitchen with the clean plates drying in the rack and the tree still lit in the corner, and he typed back, It was. Yours? The answer took a while. He'd already put the phone down when it came. Quiet. Grant's family is very formal at holidays, lots of courses, correct forks. He read that. Then, that sounds exhausting. It is. And then, a minute later, I keep thinking about the Sunday pasta. He looked at that for a long time. It'll keep, he wrote finally. The recipe's not going anywhere. She sent back a single word. Okay. He wasn't sure what she was saying okay to, but he thought maybe she wasn't sure either, and that was somehow the most honest thing that had passed between them in weeks. January came in cold and unforgiving. He noticed in the new year that Celeste was quieter during the visits. Not withdrawn, she still talked, still cooked, still made the sound about the garlic. But there was something beneath the surface of her that had changed register. She was more careful somehow, more considered, like she was carrying a calculation that she kept running and not arriving at an answer. The hand on the stomach thing happened more often, subtle. She probably didn't know she was doing it. But he saw it every time, filed it every time, and kept deciding it wasn't his to ask about. In January, she also started staying later. Not dramatically later, 30 minutes, maybe 45, but the pattern was clear if you were looking at it. She was in no hurry to leave. She sat at the table after they ate, and they talked longer, and the second cup of tea became a third, and she'd look at the clock and say, I should go, and then not go. Not immediately. Sit there for another 15 minutes, like she was postponing something. One evening, she fell asleep on his couch. Not dramatically. She'd been sitting curled at one end of it while he was at the table going over some work drawings, and they'd been half talking about something he couldn't remember now, some documentary she'd watched or something she'd read, and at some point he looked up and she was asleep, just like that. Shoes still on, head tipped against the arm of the couch, one hand on her knee. He sat there for a moment and looked at her. She looked young when she was asleep. She looked like herself, not the self that showed up on the business pages of Denver magazines or in the society column photographs, not the self with the correct fork and the $6,000 dress, but the one that had bought a blue mug from a yard sale for 50 cents and presented it like a prize. He got a blanket from the closet. He put it over her, not waking her. He turned the overhead light off and left the lamp on low, and he went back to his drawings and worked quietly while she slept. And around 11:30, she startled awake and looked at him with momentary confusion. "Hey," he said. "I fell asleep." "A little." She looked at the blanket, then at him. Something moved through her face. "I haven't slept like that in—" She stopped, looked at the window. "I haven't slept like that in a long time." "You're tired, Celeste." "I'm always tired." "That's not—" He hesitated. "Is everything okay? I mean, beyond all of it. Are you—" She was quiet for a moment. She pulled her knees up under the blanket and looked at him across the apartment, the lamp between them throwing soft light, Maisie asleep, the building making its small sounds. "I'm going to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to not make it complicated. I need you to just hear it and let it be what it is." He set down his pencil. "Okay. I'm pregnant." The word landed in the room and sat there, and Nolan did not move. He'd known, on some level. He'd known for a while in the way you know things you're not ready to name, but knowing a thing and having it said to you out loud are different, and the difference caught him somewhere in his chest. "Grants?" he said. He needed to ask. He hated that he needed to ask. "Yes." No hesitation. No apology in it either. Just the fact. "I found out 6 weeks ago." 6 weeks? He calculated. "You've known since before the first time I came here." "Yes." She was watching him carefully. "I know what you're thinking." "I don't know what I'm thinking." "You're thinking I came back here because I found out and I got scared." He looked at her. "Did you?" he asked. She didn't look away. "Partly," she said. "I'm not going to lie to you about that. Finding out I was pregnant made everything all the things I'd been pushing down, the things I told myself were fine and reasonable, all of it. It made everything come up at once. And the first place I thought of was here's." She pressed her lips together. "But it's not only that. What I feel when I'm here, She stopped. "That's real, Nolan. Whatever else is complicated, that part is real." He was quiet for a long time. "Are you going to tell him?" he asked. "I haven't yet." She pulled the blanket tighter. He's going to see it as... He's going to move very fast when he knows. He'll want everything locked down. The wedding moved up, the plans solidified. He's already... She exhaled. "He talks about the baby in terms of the company, like what it means for the public profile, what it means for the brand." Her voice was steady, but he could hear the effort of it. "He said once that he's always wanted a son, just like that, casually. We were at dinner and he just said it." Nolan felt something cold move through him. "What did you say?" "I said we don't choose." "What did he say?" "He laughed. He said the Ellisons get what they want." She looked at Nolan. He was being charming. He does this thing where he says something that sounds monstrous and then laughs, and it becomes a you know how he is moment. And everyone in his world does that. They just translate for him. "Celeste." "I know. You know what you're describing." "I know." Her voice was very quiet now. "I've known for a while. I just got very good at the translation." The lamp was steady between them. The building was quiet. Outside, January was doing its relentless thing. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "I don't know yet." She said it simply, without drama. Not, "I don't know" as a dodge, but "I don't know" as a true report of where she was. "I'm figuring it out." I needed to tell someone who wasn't part of his world, who wasn't going to immediately start doing the calculation of what it means for them. I needed to just say it out loud to someone who... She stopped. "Who what?" he asked. She looked at him. "Who I trust," she said. "Still, after all of it, I still trust you." He sat with that. "Does anyone else know?" he asked. "My doctor." And now you. He picked his pencil back up and put it down again. He wasn't ready for the drawing. He might not be ready for a while. Okay, he said. Okay? I mean, okay. I heard you. I'm not going to make it complicated like you asked. He looked at her. You don't have to figure everything out tonight. She stared at him for a moment like she was waiting for more, like she was braced for something. What? He said. I thought you were going to. She shook her head. Nothing. I don't know what I thought. You thought I was going to make a speech. Maybe. I'm not making a speech. Good. But Celeste, he waited until she looked at him. You need to figure it out, not tonight, but soon. Because a baby changes the timeline on everything, and the longer you wait to tell him, the less control you have over what happens after. I know. You need a lawyer before you tell him. She looked slightly startled, like the practical thought hadn't made it to the front yet. Your money, he said. Your fortune. You've kept it separate since the engagement? Some of it, most of it. You need someone who knows exactly what most of it means and where the line is. Before you have that conversation with Grant. He paused. Do you have someone? A good attorney? I have a business attorney. That's different. You need someone personal, someone whose job it is to be on your side. She looked at him. You've thought about this. I think about a lot of things I don't say. Sideways from the thought again, she said, but not unkindly. Get a lawyer, Celeste. He held her gaze. Promise me. She was quiet for a moment, then, I'll look into it. That's not a promise. It's what I have right now. He let it go. Some things you could push, and some things you had to let arrive on their own. He'd learned that with her the first time around, and the lesson had stayed. She stayed another 20 minutes. They didn't talk about the pregnancy again, or Grant, or what came next. She told him about a piano student she had, a 7-year-old named Felix who played everything slightly too fast and refused to slow down, and had genuine talent underneath the impatience. He told her about a project at work, a community center in Aurora, his favorite kind of job. No prestige, just a building that people would actually use. At midnight, she folded the blanket neatly over the arm of the couch. Neat, which she wasn't, generally, which meant she was being deliberate, and put her shoes back on and got her coat. At the door she stopped, which she always did, that small pause that meant something was deciding whether to be said. Thank you, she said, for just hearing it. Anytime, he said, which was true in every possible direction. She left. He locked the door and stood in the quiet. He went and checked on Maisie, who was deeply, thoroughly asleep, one arm over her face, mouth open, the way she always slept. The art kit from Christmas was on the floor beside her bed, marker caps off in 2 cases, which he capped before she could dry out on a Sunday morning and become an emergency. He turned off the lamp in the living room. He saw the blanket folded on the couch. He picked it up and held it for a second, just briefly, and then put it in the closet and went to bed. He lay there in the dark and thought about the pregnancy and what it meant, and what Grant Ellison would do when he found out, and what Celeste would do before he found out, and whether she would actually call a lawyer, or whether she'd keep postponing that too, the way she'd been postponing everything. He thought about Maisie saying Daddy smiles more. He thought about the blue mug on the shelf. He thought about the things Celeste had said, I still trust you, and how it had landed in him, that particular sentence, how it had weight, not the romantic kind, not only that, the other kind, the older kind, the kind that means something more fundamental than desire, or history, or habit. He'd been trusted by this woman when she had no one else she was trusting, and that was not nothing. That was in fact the most important thing she'd said to him in all the weeks she'd been coming back. He closed his eyes. The building made its sounds. Somewhere above him someone was still awake, footsteps crossing a floor, a life happening at its own pace. He slept eventually. Not immediately, but eventually. And January kept going, the way January always does. Indifferent to what anyone was building up to. Indifferent to timing. Indifferent to the particular human need for things to resolve themselves before they got worse. January just kept being January. Until the Tuesday, 3 weeks later, when everything that had been building quietly in the background arrived at his front door again, And this time, it didn't knock. The Tuesday Grant Ellison came to Nolan's apartment. It was 23 degrees outside, and the kind of clear that made Denver look like a photograph of itself. Everything sharp-edged and bright and slightly unreal. Nolan had been home from work for 40 minutes. He'd picked up Maisie from his neighbor Helen's apartment, where she went after kindergarten on days his schedule ran long. And Maisie had been in the middle of a story about a disagreement she'd had with a boy named Connor over whether or not elephants could swim, which she'd resolved by informing Connor that he was wrong and walking away, which was a conflict resolution strategy Nolan was not going to endorse out loud, but privately respected. He was making grilled cheese, not the pasta, just the simple Tuesday thing, bread and butter and cheese, and Maisie on the counter beside the stove talking about elephants, when the knock came. Not Celeste's knock. He knew her knock now. 3 times, quiet, uncertain. This was twice. Heavy, the kind of knock that assumed the door would open. Maisie looked at the door. "Stay here," Nolan said. "Is it Connor's dad?" Maisie asked. "No, stay here, Bug." He turned off the stove. He went to the door and looked through the peephole and felt something drop in his stomach. Not fear exactly, but the anticipation of something that was going to be very bad in a way that couldn't be avoided. Grant Ellison was taller than Nolan had expected, though he'd seen photographs. 50, maybe 52, with the kind of physical presence that came not from size but from complete comfort with taking up space. He was in a charcoal overcoat, no hat, and he was standing at Nolan's door with the specific patience of a man who did not believe he would be made to wait long. Nolan opened the door. They looked at each other. "Nolan Pierce," Grant said. Not a question. "That's right." Grant looked at him the way people look at things they are assessing a value for. His eyes moved over Nolan's face, over his shoulder, into the apartment, back to his face, all of it taking about 3 seconds. "I'm Grant Ellison," he said. "I know who you are." "Good. Then we can skip the part where I explain why I'm here." Nolan's first instinct was to step outside and pull the door mostly closed behind him, which is what he did. He didn't want Maisie to hear whatever was coming. "How'd you get my address?" he asked. "I own a real estate development company," Grant said. "I can find any address in Denver in about 20 minutes. I've known where you lived for 6 weeks. He said it without particular menace, just as information, just as a fact he was choosing to share, which was its own kind of menace. Nolan's jaw tightened. "What do you want?" "I want to talk about my fiancée." Grant put his hands in his coat pockets. Easy, comfortable, like this was his territory and always had been. "She's been spending a significant amount of time here. I think you know that." "What Celeste does with her time is—" "Her name is on my company letterhead," Grant said. "Her portfolio funds 1/3 of my current development projects. Her face is on the charitable foundation we launched together last spring. What she does with her time is very much something I have a stake in." He tilted his head slightly. "I'm not here to threaten you. I want to be clear about that." "You're not doing great on that front." Something moved at the corner of Grant's mouth. Not quite a smile. The suggestion of one. "You're funnier than I expected. Celeste mentioned that once. She said you had a dry sense of humor. She said it like it was a compliment." He paused. "I'm here to ask you, man to man, to stop. Whatever this is, the visits, the late nights, whatever arrangement you've decided is appropriate, I'm asking you to end it." "You're asking." "That's right." "Not telling." "I don't tell people things," Grant said. "I find it's less efficient than asking clearly and letting them make the right choice." Nolan looked at him. He was aware of the temperature, 23 degrees, no coat, the cold already in his shoulders. But he didn't move from the door. "Celeste is an adult," he said. "She makes her own choices." "Of course she does." Grant nodded agreeably, like they were discussing something minor. "She chose me. She chose the life we're building together. She chose to accept my proposal. Those are her choices." He paused. "What I'm less certain about is whether she's been making those choices clearly, without distraction." "Distraction," Nolan said flatly. "You represent something for her. I understand that. You were her first marriage, you have history, there's an emotional component she hasn't fully resolved. I'm not unsympathetic to that. He said it the way a man says something he is not, actually, sympathetic to at all. But we have a wedding to plan. We have a future. And she's pregnant, which I assume you didn't know that. He said it like a card he was playing, watching for the reaction. Nolan kept his face still. He'd had 30 seconds when the door opened to decide how to play this, and he'd decided on still, on giving nothing. He was grateful for the practice. We're expecting a child, Grant continued, watching Nolan's face. That changes things. That means we need to be focused, unified. It means this. He gestured vaguely at the apartment, the door, the whole situation. Needs to stop, for her sake, for the child's sake. Celeste knows what she needs, Nolan said. I'm sure she thinks she does. Grant's voice shifted slightly. Not dramatically, not into something theatrical, just slightly cooler. The way water shifts when the temperature drops, and it's not quite ice, but it's going there. She's under a significant amount of pressure right now. The pregnancy, the wedding timeline, my projects. She's not at her most, she's making decisions from an emotional place right now, which is understandable, but that's exactly when people need the people around them to provide structure. Structure, Nolan said. Is that what you call it? Grant looked at him for a long moment. What would you call it? I'd call it what it is. You're here because you're scared she's going to make a choice you can't control. The courtyard went quiet between them. The cold was thorough. Grant's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. Some small recalibration. A man who had expected a different kind of resistance and was adjusting his assessment. She won't, he said. She's smarter than that. He pulled his right hand from his pocket. No envelope, no threat, just his hand, bare in the cold. I'm asking you once to step back. Let her focus on what matters, what we're building. What you're building, Nolan said. Your words. Good luck with your evening, Grant said. And he turned and walked back down the stairs toward the parking area, where a black car was waiting with the engine running, and he didn't look back. And Nolan stood at his own door in 23 degrees and watched him go. He stood there for a moment after the car left, just standing in the cold. Then he went back inside. Maisie was at the table. The grilled cheese was cold. She was watching him with the animal attentiveness of a child who understands that something significant just happened and is deciding whether to ask about it. Who was that? She said. Someone from work, Nolan said. He went to the stove and turned the heat back on under the pan. He looked mean, Maisie said. Eat your sandwich, he said. It's cold. I know. Give it a minute. He pressed the sandwich in the pan to warm it and stood with his back to his daughter and breathed through his nose, slowly, the way he did when he needed to be careful about what he let show. His hands were steady. He was proud of that, irrationally. He texted Celeste from the counter while Maisie ate. He was here. 3 words. She'd understand. The response came in 4 minutes. I know. He told me. Are you okay? He looked at that. Fine. Are you? A longer pause this time, then, I need to see you. Not tonight. Tomorrow. Okay, he wrote. And then, because it had to be said, Celeste. Whatever he said to you tonight, you decide, not him. No response for a while. He put the phone down and sat with Maisie, and they ate the reheated grilled cheese, and she told him more about elephants, which, as it turned out, she had researched extensively since the Connor disagreement. And she informed him that elephants were in fact excellent swimmers and used their trunks as snorkels, which was the best sentence Nolan had heard all week, and he told her so. At bedtime, after the blanket was tucked and the book was read and the lamp was off, he sat at the edge of her mattress, and Maisie said in the dark, Daddy, is everything okay? Yeah, Bug, everything's okay. Promise? He thought about Celeste, and about Grant, and about the pregnancy, and about the word structure, and about a man who'd known where he lived for 6 weeks. Some things are a little complicated right now, he said, because he didn't lie to her. But complicated isn't the same as not okay. You know that, right? Like when I couldn't do the monkey bars, Maisie said. It was hard, but I practiced, and then it wasn't. Exactly like that. Did you practice? I'm working on it. She seemed satisfied with this and closed her eyes. He stayed until her breathing evened out, which took about 4 minutes, and then he went and sat on the couch in the dark for a long time. Celeste came the next evening, Wednesday, which was not their usual night. She arrived at 7, and Nolan had already put Maisie to bed early. Maisie had cooperated on this with suspicious ease, which meant either she sensed the weight in the apartment or she was building credit for something she wanted to ask for later. Celeste came in and sat at the kitchen table, and she looked like someone who had spent the night and the following day inside a very loud room where everyone was talking at her. Her coat was still on. She hadn't taken it off at the door the way she usually did. Nolan put the kettle on without asking. "He followed me," she said. He turned around. He didn't follow my car. He had someone do it." She said it flatly, not dramatically, like she'd had time to be horrified and had come out the other side into something colder. "I don't know for how long. He told me last night after he came here. He said he'd had someone looking into my movements because he was worried about my well-being. Those were his words, my well-being." Nolan leaned against the counter. "How long?" He said 2 weeks. I don't believe 2 weeks. She pulled her coat tighter, even though the kitchen was warm. "I think longer. I think since November, possibly. Maybe from the beginning." "Celeste." "I know. I know what it is, Nolan." Her voice was very controlled, the way voices are when they're controlling something that wants to be otherwise. "I've been telling myself it was concern, that he was a man who liked to be sure of things, that he was thorough, that it was just how he operated. I've been translating." She stopped. "I'm tired of translating." The kettle clicked. He made tea. He set it in front of her and she wrapped both hands around the mug, the blue one, which she'd pulled to herself automatically, the way she always did now. And she stared at it. "What did he say to you?" she asked. "When he was here?" "He asked me to step back, man to man." He paused. "He told me you were pregnant." She closed her eyes briefly. "He did it on purpose, to see if you'd react." "I know." "Did you?" "No." She opened her eyes and looked at him. "I already knew you knew," she said. "When I saw your face, when I told you about the pregnancy and you weren't surprised, you knew before I said it." "I noticed things," he said. "I didn't ask." "Why not?" "Because it wasn't mine to ask about." He sat down across from her. "Still isn't, technically." "Nothing about the last 3 months has been technically anything," she said. The first edge in her voice, the first crack in the control. She pressed her fingers against her eyes. "I'm sorry. I'm not. You don't have to apologize. I'm a mess. You're allowed to be a mess. I'm not good at being a mess. I'm good at being organized and decisive, and I built a company from a seed investment into a $40 million portfolio by the time I was 28. I'm not supposed to, She stopped, laughed briefly, without humor. My therapist would have a lot to say about that sentence. "You have a therapist?" "I started in November." She glanced at him. "Your mom, actually. She mentioned someone, a name. She slipped it into a conversation about something else, like she didn't want me to notice she was doing it." Nolan felt a wave of something for his mother that he didn't have a name for. "She's subtle like a freight train, my mom. She cares about you. She cares about you too. That's the complicated part." Celeste looked at her tea. "She shouldn't. She decides who she cares about," Nolan said. "You don't get a vote." A small silence. The building settling around them. The heat clicking in the vents. "What did the therapist say?" he asked. "She said a lot of things, slowly and over many weeks." She turned the mug in her hands. "She said that I spent 2 years with Grant getting smaller in ways I didn't notice because the getting smaller happened incrementally. She said, she used this image of a frog in water that gets slowly heated. You don't jump out because each degree is tolerable." She paused. "I've been very close to boiling for a while." "The surveillance," Nolan said. "That was the degree I couldn't tolerate," she said. "I could tell myself that the hand-holding was just how he showed affection. I could tell myself that his opinions about my friends were just protectiveness. I could tell myself that needing to know where I was at all times was—" She stopped. But having someone follow me, having someone report back, that's not protection. That's not even control. That's... She searched for the word. Ownership, Nolan said. She looked at him. Yes, she said quietly. Ownership. They sat with that word. Did you call a lawyer? He asked. Not yet. Celeste. I know, I will. She exhaled. He's very connected. The attorneys in Denver's top firms have all done work for Ellison Development at some point. I know someone, Nolan said. She looked at him. Her name is Karen Solis. She's not in the downtown firms. She practices family law and asset protection, does work for clients who need it kept quiet and separate from the corporate world. I used her for my custody arrangement when Maisie and I... He paused. When we divorced, she helped me make sure things were fair. She's good. She's not going to have any relationship with Grant's people. Celeste was very still. You looked this up, she said. After you told me about the pregnancy, yes. She stared at him, something working in her face. You researched attorneys for me. I wrote her name down on a piece of paper, and I've been waiting for the right time to give it to you. He stood up, went to the counter, opened the junk drawer, and pulled out a folded piece of paper that had been sitting there for 3 weeks. He put it on the table in front of her. I'm not going to pressure you. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I need you to take that. She looked at the paper, his handwriting on the outside, Karen Solis, and a phone number. She picked it up, held it. Why are you doing this? She said, not accusatory, genuinely asking. He sat back down. He thought about the honest answer for a moment, not about whether to give it, but about how to give it without it becoming the wrong thing, without it becoming pressure or expectation or another person trying to move her in a direction. Because you walked into my apartment 3 months ago at midnight in October, he said, and you were the most tired I'd ever seen you, in a way you didn't even know yet. And I'm not asking you for anything. I'm not trying to... He stopped, reorganized. You told me you trust me. That's what I'm trying to deserve. Not the other thing. Not the thing that maybe on some level I want. Just trust. That's enough. Celeste looked at him for a long time, long enough that he started to feel slightly exposed and looked at his tea instead. You're a better person than most, she said finally. Quietly. Not like a compliment, like a fact she was reporting. I have good days, he said. More than you think. She folded the paper and put it in her coat pocket. I'll call her, she said. Tomorrow morning. Okay? I mean it this time. I know. She picked up the mug and drank, and they were quiet for a while, the good kind of quiet, and Nolan thought about how this had become a thing. The quiet, the kitchen, the mug, and how it no longer felt like something from the past. It felt like something happening now, which was different, which was its own kind of complicated. She called Karen Solis on Thursday morning. She texted him at 9:47 a.m. I called her. We meet next week. He was at his desk at work, and he looked at the text and something loosened in his chest that he hadn't realized was tight. Good, he wrote back. She sounded smart. She is. She asked me some questions on the phone, about the financial structure, about the prenup. There was a pause, then, there's a prenup. I signed it 18 months ago. She said there are things in it I should have had reviewed by independent counsel before signing. He read that and felt a familiar cold thing move through him, but he kept his response steady. That's what she's for. She'll know what to do. Nolan. A pause. Then, what if it's bad? What if he's structured things so that leaving is... He didn't wait for her to finish. Then you figure out the real cost and you decide if freedom is worth it. It usually is. A longer pause this time. He waited. I have a lot of money, she wrote. I know. I'm terrified of losing it. I know that sounds horrible with everything else going on, but it's true. It doesn't sound horrible. It sounds like someone who built something real and doesn't want to lose it. He thought for a second, then added, the money isn't the point, but it's not nothing either. Karen will protect what you're owed. How are you so calm about all this? He smiled slightly, alone at his desk. I'm not. I'm very much not. I just type calmly. She sent back what he thought might have been the first emoji she'd ever sent him, a very small, almost reluctant laughing face. He put his phone in his drawer and tried to do work. He managed it, mostly. The meeting with Karen Solis happened on a Wednesday, and Celeste came to Nolan's apartment directly after, which he had not expected. He was feeding Maisie dinner, actual dinner this time, chicken and rice he'd put some effort in, when the knock came, and this time it was hers, 3 quiet ones, uncertain, and he opened it, and she walked in and sat at the table and didn't say anything for a moment. He put a bowl in front of her. "I didn't know you were coming," he said. "I didn't either, until I was in the car." She looked at the bowl. "Chicken and rice? Eat." She picked up the fork. Maisie was watching her from across the table with the focused curiosity she applied to all interesting things. "How come your eyes look like that?" Maisie asked. "Maisie," Nolan said. "Like what?" Celeste asked. "Like when I cried at the movie with the fish," Maisie said. "Not crying now, but like you did before." Celeste looked at her. "I had a hard meeting today," she said. Maisie considered this. "Was it worse than the monkey bars?" "Little bit." "You should practice," Maisie said sagely, and went back to her chicken. Celeste ate. Nolan watched her eat and was glad she was eating because he'd noticed in the past month that she picked at food sometimes, moved it around, ate less than she should, which was not great in general, and particularly not great given the pregnancy. After Maisie was in bed, they sat at the table and Celeste told him about the meeting. Karen Solis had gone through the prenuptial agreement line by line and found, as she'd suspected from the initial conversation, several provisions that had been structured specifically to limit Celeste's ability to exit the relationship with her own capital intact. A clause tied to what was termed breach of fidelity and commitment, broadly enough defined that it could be applied to Celeste's visits to Nolan, which Grant had now documented through his surveillance. Another clause that linked certain business partnership assets to the marriage continuing. "She was very calm about it," Celeste said. "She's done this before. She said she's seen worse, and she's seen worse fall apart in court." She turned the mug in her hands. "But she also said I need to be strategic about timing. If I initiate anything now, he has leverage from the surveillance. If I wait until after the baby, things get complicated in different ways. There's a window." "How long a window?" She said 6 to 8 weeks, maybe less. She wants to file for a formal review of the prenup on grounds of coercive signing conditions. I was represented by a junior associate from his firm's partner counsel, which she thinks is demonstrably inadequate independent review. She paused. She was angry about that. She didn't show it exactly, but I could tell. "Good," Nolan said. "She should be." She said she'd seen this pattern before, with men like Grant. She called it a very specific architecture. Celeste looked at him. She said he built the agreement so leaving would feel impossible. So even if I found out later that he'd done something, even if things went wrong, the financial structure would make leaving feel too costly. She exhaled slowly. She said the goal was never my well-being. The goal was making sure I'd stay. The apartment was quiet. "Celeste," he said, "I'm okay." She shook her head slightly. I will be. I just need a minute to sit with it." "Take the minute." She sat with it. He didn't fill the space. Outside the window, Denver was doing its winter thing, and the radiator was working, which it did about 60% of the time, and the mug was in her hands. After a while, she said, "Karen asked me why I signed without better counsel. She wasn't blaming me. She was just asking, for context." "What did you say?" "I said I trusted him." She paused. "And then she asked me if I still did. And I said no, I hadn't for a while. I just hadn't." She stopped. Her jaw tightened slightly, and he could see her working through it, that particular thing she did when emotion was coming and she was deciding how much of it to show. "I said I hadn't let myself see it clearly until recently." "Because of coming here?" She looked at him. "Because of coming here," she said. "Because I started remembering what it felt like to be somewhere I wasn't performing. And once you remember that feeling, you can't—" She stopped, started over. "Once you can feel the difference, you can't unfeel it." He looked at her across the table. The overhead light, same as always. The bowl of chicken and rice she'd half finished, the mug. "I need to tell him about the pregnancy," she said. "I can't wait much longer. She said I should tell him before the meeting with his lawyers, so it's on the table and not something he produces later as—" She pressed her hand to her stomach, the deliberate gesture he'd seen for months now. She said it will change his tactics. He'll move toward the wedding. He'll want to accelerate everything. "Will you let him?" "No." The word was immediate, which surprised even her, he thought. He saw the slight widening of her own eyes at the certainty of it. "No, I'm not—" She exhaled. Karen said the key is that nothing can feel like I'm being forced. The prenup's vulnerabilities depend on him not having grounds for the fidelity clause, which means I have to be the one to tell him. I have to be the one to step back, formally. She looked at Nolan. It means I have to stop coming here. For now. Legally, I need to be clear that I ended things on my own terms before I initiated any formal proceedings. The words sat in the room. "I know," she said, reading something in his face. "I know what I'm asking you to understand." "You're not asking me anything," he said. "You're telling me what you need to do." "Yes." "Then do it." She looked at him. "You're not going to—" "Celeste." He held her gaze. "You do what you need to do. I've been here for 3 months. I'm not going anywhere." He paused. "But you need to leave Grant first. Not for me. For you and for that baby. And for the person you were before you started translating for him." Her eyes were bright, and she pressed her lips together and looked at the ceiling briefly, the way people do when they're refusing to cry in front of someone. "Karen said something like that too," she said. "Karen sounds smart." "She is." A pause. "She reminded me of someone." "Who?" "Someone who says things adjacent to what they're thinking and then goes sideways." She looked at him. "But gets there eventually." He looked back at her. "I'm working on it." She almost smiled. Not all the way. Then she picked up the mug and held it for a moment, just held it, both hands like she was taking the temperature of it. And then she set it down carefully, exactly in the center of the table, and stood up. "I'll call Karen tomorrow," she said. "We'll start the process." "Okay." "And I'll tell Grant this week about the pregnancy." "Okay." She put on her coat. He walked to the door. She stopped in front of it and turned to him, and for a moment they were very close, the doorway being what it was in his small apartment, and he could see everything in her face, the fear and the decision and the exhaustion, and under all of it something he recognized from a long time ago, something that looked like her actual self, the one that said whatever it was thinking and bought mugs at yard sales and argued about garlic. "What if he—" she started. "When I tell him about the pregnancy, what if he's not going to be—" "You don't have to do it alone," Nolan said. "Have Karen on the phone. Have someone you trust there. Don't be alone with him when you tell him." She nodded. She hadn't thought about it that way. He could tell. "And Celeste?" He waited. "If he does anything that scares you, anything, you call me." "Nolan? Not because of me and you and all the rest of it. Just because you should have someone to call." He held her eyes. "Okay?" She looked at him for a long moment. "Okay," she said. She opened the door. The cold came in briefly. She stepped out and he stood in the doorway, and she didn't pause on the stairs the way she sometimes did. She just went, her coat pulled around her and her hand in her pocket where the folded piece of paper with Karen's number had been 3 weeks ago and wasn't anymore because it had been replaced by something that was actually going to change things. He closed the door. He stood in his apartment, and it felt, in the way places feel when someone has been in them for a while and then isn't, slightly changed in her absence. The bowl she'd eaten from was still on the table. The mug was still in the center where she'd set it. He washed up. He turned off the kitchen light. He went to check on Maisie, who had her arm over her face and her mouth open and who was absolutely, thoroughly, unconcernedly asleep. He stood there for a while. Then he went to the living room and sat down on the couch and thought about what comes next, which was a thing he was usually careful not to do. What comes next being the kind of thinking that led nowhere useful when you didn't control the timeline. But he was only human. And it was late. and he was tired, and the apartment still held the particular quality of a room where something had been decided. He sat there in the dark for a while, not sleeping, not quite, just waiting for the night to get itself over with. And then, because there was nothing else to do, he went to bed. And he was still there, still waiting in the particular way that isn't active but isn't passive either. The way you wait when you know that someone you love is walking toward the hardest thing they've ever done. And all you can do is be the place they come back to set. When 3 nights later his phone rang at 10:47 p.m., and it was Celeste's number, and when he answered, her voice was not panicked, but it was compressed, the way voices are when they are holding themselves together through force of will. "He came here," she said. "He came to my apartment. I told him about the pregnancy and he's here. He said things." A pause. The sound of her exhale. "Nolan, I need you to come." He was already up, already moving. "I'm coming," he said. Celeste's apartment was in Cherry Creek, the kind of building that had a doorman and underground parking and a lobby that smelled like fresh flowers because someone changed them twice a week. Nolan had never been inside it. He'd known the address in the abstract, the way you know things about a person's life that you're no longer part of. But he'd never had a reason to go there. He had a reason now. He'd called his neighbor Helen from the car, woken her up, asked if she could listen for Maisie through the shared wall. Helen was 70 years old and had raised 4 children and had the particular unflappable quality of someone who had seen everything and decided most of it was manageable. She said of course and didn't ask questions, which was why he'd called her, not someone else. The drive was 14 minutes. He made it in 11. The doorman at the front desk was a young guy, mid-20s, who looked like he'd been having a quiet night and wasn't thrilled that it had stopped being one. Nolan gave Celeste's name and apartment number, and the doorman made a call, and Celeste's voice came through the desk phone saying, "Let him up." And the doorman gave Nolan the elevator code with the neutral expression of a man who had learned not to register what he saw. 10th floor. End of the hall. The door was unlocked, which she'd done deliberately, and he pushed it open. The apartment was large, larger than he'd expected, though he didn't know why he'd had an expectation, with high ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city lights of Denver. It was the kind of place that had been decorated with intention, everything considered, everything placed. A white couch, a marble coffee table, a grand piano against the far wall that he recognized as the thing she'd talked about most in the early years, the thing she'd always been going to buy when she had the money. She was standing by the piano, not sitting. Standing, with her arms crossed and her jaw set, and when Nolan came in she looked at him, and the jaw didn't change but something around her eyes did. Grant Ellison was sitting on her white couch like it was his. He looked at Nolan when Nolan came through the door, and something moved across his face. A quick recalculation, a flash of something that might have been anger or might have been contempt, gone before it fully arrived. He was in a suit jacket, no tie, and he had a glass of something amber on the marble table in front of him, which meant he'd found her liquor cabinet and helped himself, which told Nolan everything he needed to know about how this evening had been going. "The architect," Grant said. Nolan didn't look at him. He looked at Celeste. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," she said. Her voice was controlled but thin at the edges. "She's fine," Grant said from the couch. "She called you because she wanted an audience, which is a pattern with her. She performs better with witnesses." "Grant," Celeste said, "I'm not being unkind, I'm being accurate." He picked up the glass, set it down. "We were having a private conversation about our child, and she decided to bring in—" "She called me," Nolan said. He turned to look at Grant now fully. "She called me because you scared her." "I didn't. The fact that you don't think you did is part of the problem." Grant looked at him. A long look. The same assessing look as the night at Nolan's door, but with something added to it now. An edge. Something that recognized it was being pushed against and didn't like it. "This doesn't involve you," Grant said. "You made it involve me when you showed up at my door," Nolan said. "And she made it involve me when she called. So here we are." He looked back at Celeste. "What happened?" Celeste exhaled slowly. She glanced at Grant once, then back at Nolan, making a decision. "I told him about the pregnancy," she said, "like I planned to. And for the first few minutes it was fine. He was He seemed pleased. He started talking about the wedding timeline, like I expected. He wants to move the date to March. He wants it done before I'm visibly... She stopped. Before I'm showing. He wants it clean for the photographs. Clean, Nolan said. His word. I said tasteful, Grant said. I said we should consider the optics of a... And then I told him, Celeste continued over him, that I'd met with a family attorney. The room shifted. Grant set the glass down with a sound that was not quite a slam, but was in that direction. You told me you were seeing a business consultant. I know what I told you. You lied to me. I protected myself, she said, because I needed to, because you had me followed, because the prenuptial agreement I signed was reviewed by someone on your payroll, and I didn't know that until 3 weeks ago, and I should have known it then. Her voice was still controlled, but there was something under it now, something that had been waiting for the right room to say this in. I protected myself because somewhere in the last 2 years, I stopped being able to do that on my own. Grant was very still on the couch. And then, Celeste said, her voice going quieter, I told him I thought we should put the wedding on hold, that I needed time to think. Time to think, Grant repeated. He said it without inflection, which was somehow more alarming than if he'd said it with heat. Yes. We're having a child. I know. You're 4 months pregnant with my child, and you want to think. I want to understand what I'm agreeing to before I agree to it, Celeste said, which is something I should have done 18 months ago. I didn't. I'm doing it now. Grant stood up. He wasn't loud about it. He was the kind of man who didn't need to be loud, whose size and presence and the particular quality of his attention did the work that other men did with volume. He stood up and buttoned his jacket, and he looked at Celeste the way he'd looked at Nolan's apartment on Federal Boulevard, like something he was deciding the value of. You're making a mistake, he said. Maybe, she said, but it's mine to make. The agreement, I know about the agreement. My attorney knows about the agreement. Your attorney? He let out a small breath, not quite a laugh. You understand what this costs you. You understand that the minute you walk this direction, everything we've built together... What you've built, she said. With my capital. Let's be specific. Something shifted in his face, a controlled, precise shift, like a door being closed firmly. He picked up his glass from the table, looked at it, set it back down without drinking. I'm going to give you time, he said, like it was a gift, like he was being extraordinarily generous. Because you're pregnant, and because this is clearly an emotional... Grant. She cut him off cleanly, without raising her voice. I need you to leave. He looked at her. Please, she said. Leave my apartment tonight. And tomorrow I'm going to call you, and we're going to figure out what a reasonable separation looks like. And we're going to do that through our attorneys, because I think that's the only way this doesn't become something we both regret. Grant looked from Celeste to Nolan, back to Celeste. This is his influence, he said. Whatever you think you're deciding, whatever this... He gestured between her and Nolan with emotion that managed to be insulting without being specific. Whatever this is, it's clouding your... It's clarifying it, she said. That's the difference. She uncrossed her arms, stood straight. Please, go. Another long moment, the city lights through the windows, the piano against the wall, the white couch with the amber glass on the marble table. Grant picked up the glass, took it to the kitchen counter, which Nolan noted. He didn't leave it for her to clean up. He took it to the counter, because even in this moment, he was managing his image, maintaining the version of himself that was reasonable and civilized and wronged, rather than wrong. He picked up his coat from the arm of the couch. At the door he stopped. I'll be speaking with my attorneys in the morning, he said to the room in general, to both of them, to neither of them. I'd suggest yours does the same. He left. The door clicked closed behind him. The room did what rooms do after a person like that leaves. It recalibrated. The air changed slightly, the space that had been compressed by his presence expanding back into itself. Celeste stood very still for a moment. Then she sat down on the white couch, the exact spot he'd been sitting, and put her face in her hands. Not crying. Or if crying, silently, the kind where you press the sound back in. Nolan sat on the coffee table across from her. It was a marble coffee table, and it was cold, and it was probably not designed for sitting on, but it put him at eye level with her, and that was the point. He didn't say anything. He just sat there. After a while, she looked up. Her eyes were wet, but she'd kept it together, mostly, and she exhaled a slow breath and looked at him with the expression of someone who has just set down something very heavy and is checking to see if their hands still work. "You drove fast," she said. 14 minutes is a long drive. "It took you 11. Did you time it?" "I was tracking your location." She saw his face. "I know. Ironic." A small, exhausted, real sound that was almost a laugh. "I turned on location sharing when I called you. I wanted to know when you were close." "I was close," he said. "You were." She looked at her hands. He didn't do anything. I want to be clear. He wasn't violent. He was just, I know what he was. "It was the way he talked about the baby," she said, quietly. "When I told him, his first question wasn't, 'Are you okay?' It wasn't, 'How are you feeling? Are you healthy?' It was, he asked what the doctor said about genetic testing. He asked about the blood work. He wanted the medical data." She paused. Like he was assessing an asset. Nolan was quiet. "And I thought about..." She stopped, started over. "I thought about what it would be like, having a baby in that world, having a daughter or a son who grew up in that world, where everything is an asset, everything is managed, everything is optimized and photographed and put on a seating chart." She pressed her hand flat against her stomach. "I don't want that for her." "Her?" he said. Celeste looked up. "I don't know for certain yet, but I think so." Something in her face that was private, that belonged only to her and the pregnancy, a thing that had nothing to do with Grant or Nolan or any of the larger mess. "I think it's a girl." He sat with that for a moment. Something complicated moving in him that he didn't examine in real time. "What's Karen's read on the timeline?" he asked. "Practical. Staying with what was useful." She said if he goes immediately aggressive with his attorneys, we need to respond within days with the prenup challenge. She's been preparing it already. She anticipated this. Celeste looked at him. She said, "She warned me that he might try to use the pregnancy to argue for immediate proceedings, that he'd want to establish paternity rights formally and quickly in a structure that benefits his position." "Can he do that?" Karen said she's seen it attempted. She said it's messier than it looks because Colorado family law doesn't actually favor either party by default, and because the prenup has the issues it has. She exhaled. She said the next 3 weeks are the hard part. After that, we'll have a clearer picture. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she repeated, slightly bewildered by the word's inadequacy for everything it was being asked to cover. He stood up from the coffee table. His lower back protested, marble being marble. He moved to the couch and sat beside her. Not close. There was a cushion of space between them, but present, available. She leaned her head back against the couch and looked at the ceiling. "I keep thinking about what the therapist said," she said. "About the frog in the water. The gradually heating water. She said the thing about that image, the thing people always forget, is that the frog doesn't have to stay in the water. She said the hardest part isn't recognizing the heat. It's believing you're allowed to just..." She moved one hand slightly, a small gesture of departure. "Get out." "She sounds good," Nolan said. "She is." Celeste closed her eyes briefly. "I'm going to see her twice a week for a while. She thinks it would help." She paused. "She's also said, tactfully, that my pattern of substituting your kitchen for actual decision-making was..." "She knows about the kitchen?" "She knows everything. That's what therapy is." She glanced at him sideways, eyes still half closed. She called it comfort-seeking behavior with avoidant characteristics. She said I was using something genuine to delay something necessary. Was she wrong? "No," Celeste admitted. "I was hiding in your kitchen. It was warm and it smelled like garlic, and no one was asking me to be anyone in particular, and I..." She stopped. "I needed that. I needed it badly. But I also used it to not face things I should have faced sooner." "You faced them," he said. "Eventually." "That counts." She looked at him. You're generous. I have bad days too, he said. I just try not to have them at you. She was quiet for a moment. The city lights through the windows were steady, Denver doing its nighttime thing, indifferent. Nolan, she said. Yeah. When this is done, when it's actually done, when the attorneys and the proceedings and all of it are behind me, I need to. She stopped. I need to be alone for a while. Actually, alone. I need to figure out who I am outside of someone else's story before I. She stopped again. I know, he said. I'm not saying it. I know what you're not saying. He looked at her. And I'm telling you, I know. You don't owe me a timeline. You don't owe me a promise. You just do what you need to do. She looked at him for a long time. The mug, she said. What about it? When I walked in that first night, October, when I saw it on the shelf. She looked at her hands. That was the moment I knew I'd been making the wrong choice. Not the only moment, not the thing that caused everything, but the moment I could feel it in my body. That small, stupid 50-cent mug on the second shelf of your kitchen, and you'd kept it. She pressed her lips together. I'd spent 2 years building a life with someone who bought me a diamond that cost more than most people's houses, and the thing that broke me open was a mug from a yard sale. It has personality, he said. It has a chip, she said. That's the personality. She let out a breath that was also a laugh, a real one, brief and tired and completely unperformed, and he thought that was the version of her laugh he'd been hearing in his head for 3 years without knowing it. They sat there for a while, not talking much. The city outside was quiet in the way that cities are at 11:30 on a weeknight, not truly quiet, but at a lower frequency. She was tired. He could see it. The whole night was in her face. The whole 3 months were in her face. And under that, the last 2 years, and under that, everything she'd been carrying. I'll call Karen in the morning, she said. First thing. Good. She's going to be annoyed that things accelerated. Probably. She'll handle it, though. She's that kind of person. She is. Celeste looked at him. You're that kind of person, too, she said. You know that? I have my moments. More than moments. She sat up slightly. I should let you go. Maisie. Helen's next door. She's fine. Still. She stood up from the couch. He stood too. They were standing in the middle of her large, carefully decorated apartment, and it struck him now, as it hadn't when he'd first come in, because he'd been looking at Grant on the couch, that for all its beauty, all its precision, it didn't look like her. It looked like a version of her that had been curated for someone else's approval. The white, the marble, the expensiveness of every surface. He looked at the piano, which was the one thing in the room that seemed fully hers, its presence unapologetic, taking up a third of the far wall. You play it? He asked. Every day, she said. That's the one thing. She looked at it. He wanted me to put it in the studio, said it was too large for a living space. I told him it was staying. She paused. He didn't fight me on the piano. I think he thought it made the apartment look artistic, good for hosting. Nolan looked at the piano. Play something, he said. She looked at him. Now? You don't have to. She looked at the piano for a moment, then she crossed the room and sat down on the bench and just sat there for a second, hands in her lap. He stayed where he was, across the room. She played. Not something he recognized by name, something she'd written or half-written, something that didn't have defined edges. It moved and circled and repeated a phrase in slightly different forms each time, the way thoughts do when you're working through something you don't have words for yet. It wasn't perfect. She missed a note twice in the same spot, which meant it was something she was still learning, still building. There was a section in the middle that stopped and started like she wasn't sure yet how to cross a particular bridge. It was the most honest thing he'd heard all evening. When she stopped, she sat for a moment with her hands still on the keys. What's it called? He asked. I don't know yet, she said. It doesn't have a name. Things don't get names until I know what they are. He thought about that. I'll call you tomorrow, she said. After I call Karen. Okay? And Nolan. She stood from the bench. Thank you for coming. For all of it. For not... She stopped. You could have said I told you so approximately 15 times in the last 3 months. I don't like that phrase. Most people do. It never actually makes anyone feel better. The person saying it just feels superior for about 4 seconds, and then it's the same situation it was before. She looked at him. What do you like instead? I like what do you need? He paused. It's a better question. She was quiet for a moment, then, what I need right now is to sleep, and to call my attorney in the morning, and to stop feeling like the floor is moving. The floor will stop, he said. It takes a while, but it stops. Is that experience talking? It is, he said. And they both knew what experience he meant. He left. She walked him to the door, and he took the elevator down and nodded to the doorman and stepped out into the February cold, which had the particular clean bite of late winter, and he stood on the sidewalk for a moment and looked up at the building. 10th floor, end of the hall. He couldn't see any light from the street. He got in his car. He sat there for a moment before starting it, hands on the wheel, looking at nothing in particular. He was tired in a way that was deeper than the time of night accounted for. The kind of tired that comes from holding yourself carefully for hours, from being steady on someone else's behalf, from doing the right thing for reasons that were not entirely uncomplicated. He started the car. He drove home. Helen met him at the door to his apartment in her bathrobe and slippers, handed him back his key and said, "Is everyone all right?" And he said yes, and she looked at him with the same calm she'd probably used on her 4 kids when they came home from things they'd survive, and she said, "Good, sleep," and went back to her apartment. Maisie was still asleep. He checked. She'd kicked the blanket off again, and he tucked it back, and she turned toward the wall. He went to the kitchen. The bowl from Celeste's half-eaten dinner earlier was still in the sink because he'd left in a hurry and hadn't washed it. He washed it now. The pan was on the stove. He put it away. He looked at the mug on the shelf. He'd kept it for 3 years without really asking himself why. It had just been there, in the same place, the small chipped blue-rimmed mug that had cost 50 cents at a yard sale and had been presented to him like a prize. He'd used it for coffee. He'd washed it. He'd put it back. He'd never moved it from that shelf. He reached up and held it for a moment, the way she did sometimes. It was an ordinary mug, slightly small, slightly uneven, with a chip on the handle that had been there since approximately the second week they'd owned it. He put it back on the shelf. He turned off the light and went to bed, and this time sleep found him faster than it had been doing, which he took as something, not a sign, just a physiological fact, the body doing its job when the mind has finally stopped arguing with it. The weeks that followed were not dramatic in the way things are dramatic in stories. They were paperwork. They were phone calls. They were the specific grind of legal proceedings that moved at their own speed regardless of anyone's emotional state. Karen Solis filed the prenuptial challenge in the second week of February, citing inadequate independent counsel and coercive structural conditions. Grant's attorneys responded within 48 hours, which Karen said was aggressive and told her everything she needed to know about his strategy. Nolan heard about all of this second or third hand, from Celeste's text, shorter now, more purposeful, not the late-night messages of someone postponing something, and occasionally from his mother, who knew what was happening in the way Patricia Pierce always knew what was happening, through a network of care and attention that had never required anyone's permission. He didn't see Celeste in person, not because there was a rule about it, not because Karen had told them not to. She hadn't. But because they'd both made an implicit agreement that this was the time for her to stand on her own ground, and he was not going to be the reason she didn't. He missed her. He was honest with himself about that. He missed her in the kitchen, missed the sound she made about the garlic, missed Maisie's running commentary on whatever book or discovery or interpersonal drama was occupying her kindergarten week. He missed the late quiet at the kitchen table, the blue mug, the ease of it. He did his job. He picked Maisie up from Helen's and made dinner and read chapter books about weather-talking girls and rabbit detectives. He went to his firm and worked on the Aurora Community Center, which was the kind of project that asked things of him, good things, meaningful things, and he let it. He called his mother on Sundays, which he always had, and she never mentioned Celeste directly, but she asked after him in the specific way she had when she was taking his temperature. And he said, "I'm okay," and mostly he meant it. Marcus took him to a bar on a Friday night, and didn't ask about Celeste until the second beer. And then Nolan told him the short version, and Marcus listened without interrupting, which was the main thing you needed from a friend in those moments. And then he said, "So you're just waiting?" And Nolan said, "I'm not waiting. I'm living. It's a different thing." And Marcus said, "Is it?" And Nolan said, "Ask me in 6 months." And Marcus said, "Fair enough," and they finished their beers. He was living. That was the truest word for it. His life was his life, small and real and made of the actual components of an actual Tuesday. And he'd made his peace with that. And he was not on hold, not suspended, not waiting for something to begin. He was just here, the way he'd told Celeste he was, not going anywhere. In March, when the cherry trees that someone had planted optimistically along Federal Boulevard were doing their brief, aggressive best, Celeste texted him. "I found an apartment." He read it in the parking lot of the grocery store with 2 bags in the car. "Where?" he wrote. "Capitol Hill. Small. 1 bedroom. I know it's very small compared to..." A pause. "It's mine. The lease is mine. The address is mine. Karen helped me find it through a property manager who doesn't have any relationship with Grant's holdings." He sat with that. "How do you feel?" he wrote. The response took a few minutes. "Terrified. Also like I can breathe, both things at the same time. Is that normal?" "Yeah," he wrote. "That's exactly what normal feels like." Another pause, then, "Nolan, I started therapy twice a week. I know. You told me. I know you know. I'm telling you again because she said something this week that I keep thinking about. She said that the hardest habit to break after a relationship like the one with Grant is the habit of making yourself small enough to fit into someone else's plans. She said the question isn't who you want to be with, it's who you want to be." He read that twice. "And?" he wrote. "I'm working on it," she wrote back. He looked at the grocery bags in the back seat. He thought about the community center in Aurora, which was going to have good light through the east-facing windows, which was going to be a place people actually used. "Good," he wrote. "That's the whole thing." She didn't respond for a while, and then, "How's Maisie?" "She has strong opinions about elephant swimming now. Her teacher made her do a report on it." "Did she cite Connor?" "She cited Connor as the source of the original false claim, yes. Her teacher found this charming, a laughing emoji. The second one she'd ever sent him. He started the car. He drove home. He made dinner. He helped Maisie with her letters, which she was writing now in a notebook she'd designated as her official writing book. And he sat beside her at the kitchen table and she wrote her name 4 times, each one slightly different, experimenting. Later, after she was asleep, he sat in the kitchen with his coffee in the chipped blue mug, and he thought about what Celeste's therapist had said. Who do you want to be? He thought he knew. He'd known for a while, actually. He wanted to be the man who opened his door at midnight in October when he should have kept it locked, who made pasta with someone who needed to be somewhere safe, who tucked blankets and looked up attorneys and drove 14 minutes in 11 and sat on a marble coffee table to be at someone's eye level. He wanted to be the man who was still here. That was enough. That was, he thought, everything. The mug was warm in his hands. Outside, March was doing what March did in Denver, changing its mind every 4 hours, warm and then cold and then sunny and then threatening, completely unable to commit. He'd always found March slightly exhausting and also somewhat honest. He finished his coffee. He washed the mug and put it back. And across the city, in a small 1-bedroom apartment in Capitol Hill that had a lease in her name and an address that belonged to her, Celeste Varden was beginning, slowly and imperfectly and without a clear plan, to figure out who she was. That was where things stood. Not resolved, not finished, not any of the clean words for the end of something, just standing, upright, on their own ground, both of them, which after everything was not nothing. The news about Grant Ellison broke on a Thursday morning in April, which felt appropriate somehow, Thursdays having become the day of things arriving without warning in Nolan's life. He was at his desk at work, coffee going cold beside a set of drawings for the Aurora Community Center, when Dana appeared in his doorway with her phone in her hand and an expression he couldn't immediately read. "You should probably see this," she said. She handed him the phone. The Denver Business Journal had it first, Then the Post picked it up within the hour. Ellison Development, under federal investigation for securities fraud. The subheading SEC and DOJ, Joint Inquiry into Investor Misrepresentation across 3 major projects. He read the article twice. Then he handed Dana back her phone. "Okay," he said. Dana looked at him for a moment. "Are you going to call her?" "No," he said. "She'll call me when she's ready." Dana nodded, which was the right response, and went back to her desk, and Nolan turned back to his drawings and tried to work, and managed it about 40% as well as usual. The call came at noon. Not a text this time, a call, her actual voice, which he hadn't heard in almost 6 weeks of texts and careful distance. "I assume you saw," she said. "This morning. Karen called me at 7 a.m. She'd been tipped off the night before." A pause. She was professional about it, but I could hear it. She was satisfied, in the quiet way she gets. "What does it mean for your proceedings?" "It changes things significantly. If the federal investigation proceeds the way Karen thinks it will, the leverage he had from the prenup essentially collapses. The surveillance, the coercive conditions, in the context of an active fraud investigation, his position is weakened across the board." Her voice was steady, but he could hear the thing underneath it. Not glee, something more complicated than glee. "His attorneys contacted Karen this morning. They want to talk about a settlement." "Already?" "He moves fast when he needs to," she said. "That's one true thing about him." Nolan was quiet for a moment. "How do you feel about it?" "I don't know yet," she said. I thought it would feel like something landing, like resolution." She paused. "Mostly I just feel tired, and a little sorry for him, which my therapist is going to have opinions about." "Being sorry for someone isn't the same as being wrong," he said. "No," she agreed. "It's not." A brief silence. "She says I have an overdeveloped capacity for empathy toward people who've hurt me, and an underdeveloped capacity to extend that same empathy to myself. She says it like it's a very fixable problem. I appreciate her optimism." "It is fixable," he said. "You sound like her." "She sounds smart." "She is. She also charges $180 an hour, which I think is appropriate." Another pause. The comfortable kind. The kind they'd always been able to find. "Nolan." "Yeah. I'm okay. I want you to know that. I'm genuinely okay. The apartment is small and the bathroom has a crack in the tile that my landlord has promised to fix for 6 weeks, and I eat cereal for dinner sometimes because cooking for one feels like too much effort. But She stopped. Tried again. "I'm making choices. Small ones and large ones, and they're mine. That's new. It's been a while since things were mine. How's the piano coming? I put it in storage when I left Cherry Creek. I couldn't fit it in the Capitol Hill place." A brief silence. "But I rented studio time at a place on Colfax, Tuesday mornings. They have a good Steinway." He registered the street name but didn't say anything about it. "And the baby?" he asked. "She's good," Celeste said, and even through the phone he could hear it. That private thing, that knowledge she'd had since January, the conviction that it was a girl. "She moves a lot. The doctor says that's normal. She says it like she's complimenting the baby on her personality." A small sound. "She's 22 weeks. You look—" He stopped. He hadn't seen her. "I look very pregnant," she said, reading his stop. "It happened fast. 1 week I was fine, and then the week after I genuinely cannot see my feet." A pause. I don't mind it. That surprised me. I thought I'd mind it more." "You always said you were practical about bodies." "I am. Bodies are just doing what they do. I'm more worried about the part after, the actual baby." A brief silence with a different quality to it, something more exposed. "I'm scared, Nolan, about doing it alone." "You're not doing it alone," he said. "You have Karen, your therapist, your mom. My mom is in Phoenix, and we have a complicated relationship that I'm also working on in therapy. So let's—" She stopped. "I know I have people. I know that. I just mean I'm scared." She paused. "I'm allowed to be scared, right?" "Yeah," he said. You're absolutely allowed to be scared. Okay. A breath. Okay. I should let you go. I wanted to hear your voice when I told you about Grant. I didn't want to text that. I'm glad you called. Me too. Another pause, this one with weight. Nolan, thank you for all the months of this, for not asking me to be anything I wasn't ready to be. You didn't ask me for that either, he said. You let me be a person with a small apartment and a 5-year-old and a pasta pan. Nobody does that. A real laugh. Brief, clear, reaching him through the phone like something actual. The pasta pan has real personality, she said. It was $40. You paid $22. She started at 40. And there it was, the old loop, the one that had been running between them since October, since that first midnight kitchen. And it was funny, but it was also more than funny. It was the shorthand for everything that didn't need to be said because it had already been lived. I'll call you soon, she said. I'll be here, he said. Okay. The settlement between Celeste and Grant was finalized in May. Karen Solis, in the end, had been exactly the person Nolan had thought she'd be. Thorough, strategic, and angry in the quiet professional way that made her dangerous in a negotiation room. The prenuptial agreement was challenged and partially voided on the grounds of inadequate independent review. Celeste's capital, the portfolio she'd built before Grant, the assets she'd contributed to their joint ventures, was ring-fenced and returned cleanly. The business entanglements took longer to unravel, would continue to unravel in the background for months, but the personal piece was done. Grant's attorneys had pushed back less than expected, which Karen said was because the federal investigation made him want minimal additional exposure. He was occupied with the larger problem of the DOJ and the SEC, and a contentious separation fight with a pregnant former fiancée who had a paper trail supporting coercive conditions was not something his legal team wanted running alongside a fraud case. Nolan heard about the settlement from Celeste in a text that said, "It's done. Karen says it's as good as it could have gone." I think that's true. I feel strange. He texted back. Strange how? Like after you've been holding your breath for a long time and you finally let it out, and your lungs don't quite know what to do with the air yet. He thought about that. Give them time, he wrote. They'll figure it out. He didn't push to see her. He let May be May. She had a baby coming and a new apartment and therapy twice a week, and a Steinway on Tuesday mornings, and the slow work of rebuilding the infrastructure of her own life, and none of that needed him at the center of it. He understood this. He'd understood it since she'd said it in the Cherry Creek apartment. I need to be alone for a while. I need to figure out who I am outside of someone else's story. He'd told her he understood and he'd meant it, and the months of distance had not shaken that. He missed her. That was still true. But missing someone and needing them to be ready are not competing things. He worked on the Aurora Community Center, which was moving toward its groundbreaking in June. He took Maisie to the park on weekends. He had dinners with Marcus and Diane, and once a month with his mother, who asked after him in the temperature-taking way and was satisfied with what she found. He read chapter books and tucked blankets and made pasta on Sundays out of habit, for himself. The big pan in the olive oil and the one burned piece of garlic, the too much salt, the excess of Parmesan. He kept the mug on the shelf. Lena Pierce Varden was born on a Tuesday in late June, 6 pounds, 4 ounces. Fully operational lungs, the nurses reported, which was their tactful way of saying she arrived yelling and continued yelling until placed against her mother's chest, at which point she stopped, abruptly and completely, and seemed to decide that this was acceptable. Celeste texted a photo at 3 a.m, just the photo, no words. Celeste looking like she'd been through something serious, which she had, and exhausted in a way that was also, unmistakably, completely at peace. And in her arms, the baby, small, red-faced, absolutely furious to be anywhere at all. Nolan looked at the photo for a long time. Then he typed, "She's here," and Celeste, "She's here." He sat in his kitchen at 3 a.m. with his coffee and the overhead light and the mug on the shelf and the knowledge that somewhere across the city, a woman he had loved for most of his adult life was holding a daughter she had chosen to keep and to raise on her own terms. and he felt something that was made of many things at once: gladness and longing, and a particular kind of love that doesn't ask anything of anyone because it's not that kind of love, and the recognition that some feelings don't resolve, they just find a place to live that doesn't interfere with everything else. He texted, "Get some sleep. She'll be there when you wake up." Celeste. "That's the terrifying part." Nolan. "And the good part?" A long pause. Then, "Yes, that too." Megan. He didn't go to the hospital. She hadn't asked him to, and he hadn't offered, and that felt like the right shape of things. She had her mother, who had come from Phoenix and was apparently less complicated in person than she was in history. Grief and time and a grandchild on the way, having softened things that therapy was working on from the other direction. He sent flowers. Maisie picked them out. She took this task very seriously and spent 11 minutes at the florist deliberating before landing on sunflowers, which she declared were the most cheerful, and Lena deserved cheerful. "Do you know Lena?" the florist had asked Maisie, making conversation. "Not yet," Maisie said, "but I'm going to." He didn't correct that. He didn't know what the right shape of it was, but he thought Maisie might be right in the uncomplicated way she was often right about things that adults tangled up. The sunflowers arrived, and Celeste texted a photo of them in a vase by the hospital window, and then a second photo of Lena's hand wrapped around Celeste's finger, which was the specific tiny hand wrapped around finger thing that Nolan knew from when Maisie was born was genuinely as significant as it looked. "Perfect choice on the flowers," Celeste wrote. "Thank Maisie," he wrote back. She spent 11 minutes. "Tell her Lena says thank you. Maisie will take this very seriously." She should. "Lena is a serious person. She's only been here for 9 hours, and I can already tell." He smiled at his phone. Put it down. Picked it up again and didn't say anything, just because he didn't need to. Summer moved in and made itself at home the way Denver summers do. Sudden and confident, the light going long past 8 p.m., the city changing its texture. Celeste came back from the hospital to the Capitol Hill apartment. Her mother stayed for 3 weeks. Her therapist did phone sessions. Karen Solis sent a bottle of wine and a handwritten note that Celeste photographed and texted to Nolan, which read, "You made every hard call correctly. Trust that." 3 sentences from a woman who charged $180 an hour to say exactly what needed saying. Nolan didn't see her for 2 months after Lena was born. It wasn't deliberate distance anymore. It was just logistics, the logistics of a newborn and a woman reorganizing her entire life from the inside out. She texted regularly, sometimes late at night when Lena was feeding and she had a free hand and apparently needed to say things to someone who was not a lactation consultant or her mother. He was glad to be that person. He texted back. Sometimes they talked on the phone. Those particular late-night calls where you're both tired and your defenses are low and you say things more honestly than you would in daylight. In one of those calls, she said, "I think I was a terrible wife to you." He was quiet for a moment. "That's not... Let me finish." A pause. "I was so focused on what I was building, what I needed to prove, to myself and to everyone who thought I'd gotten lucky with my first funding round and not actually. I was so in it. And you were there, and you were steady, and I just assumed steady meant permanent, that you'd be there regardless of what I did." "I was there regardless," he said. "You shouldn't have had to be." Another pause. "I don't think I knew how to be chosen by someone like you and believe it was real. I think I thought that choosing you back meant settling for something smaller than what I was supposed to want." And now? A long silence. Lena made a small sound in the background, a sleeping sound. "Now I think small and real might be the whole thing," she said. "I think I wasted a long time confusing the size of something with its value." He didn't say "I told you so." He had never said that and never would. "You didn't waste it," he said. "You lived it. That's how you learned it." "That's generous. It's accurate." "You always do that," she said. "Find the version of a thing that's true and also kind." "Sometimes they're the same version." "More often with you than most people," she said. And he heard the weight in it, the thing she wasn't fully saying, the neighborhood of the thought she was circling. He didn't push. He let it be what it was. The first time he saw Lena was in August. It came about sideways, the way things between them usually had. Celeste texting on a Saturday morning that she was going to the farmer's market, and Maisie's school had just sent home a newsletter mentioning the importance of fresh vegetables, which was probably a long way to come to what was, essentially, do you want to come to the farmer's market? He did. He brought Maisie, who wore her best shoes because she had decided meeting Lena was an occasion. He had not told her to bring anything, but she brought, from her room and without announcement, a small stuffed rabbit that she had loved at age 3 and had retired from active duty with full honors, and she carried it in her hand the whole drive. Celeste was at a stand selling heirloom tomatoes when they found her. She had Lena in a carrier against her chest. The baby's face turned inward and mostly visible as a small head with a remarkable amount of dark hair. Celeste looked good. Tired in the deep-down permanent way of new mothers everywhere, but present, more present than she'd looked in that Cherry Creek apartment a lifetime ago. She looked like herself, the actual version. She saw them coming and she stood still for a moment, hand resting on Lena's back in the carrier, and she smiled. Not the careful one. Not the one she'd learned for Grant's 400-person parties. The one that reached her eyes. "Hey," she said. "Hey," Nolan said. Maisie was already standing on her toes to look at the baby. "This is Lena?" Maisie asked. "This is Lena," Celeste said. Maisie studied the baby with the intensity she brought to all serious research. "She's small," she observed. "She's 8 weeks old. You were small once." Maisie looked skeptical about this. "She has a lot of hair." "She does." "I didn't have hair," Maisie said, looking at her father for confirmation. "You had some," Nolan said. "Eventually." Maisie looked back at Lena, then held up the stuffed rabbit. "I brought her this," she said to Celeste. "It's a rabbit. I had it when I was little. It's very soft." She paused. "You don't have to keep it if you don't want, but she can have it if she wants." Celeste looked at the rabbit, then at Maisie, and something moved through her face that she didn't try to manage. "She would love that," Celeste said. "Thank you, Maisie." Maisie nodded, satisfied, and tucked the rabbit into the edge of the carrier beside Lena with the focused care of someone completing an important transfer. They walked through the market. It was a Saturday in August, and Denver was doing its best, the kind of morning that was warm without being punishing. The mountains visible on the horizon doing what the mountains did, which was simply be there and remind you they were there. Nolan bought tomatoes and Celeste bought peaches, and Maisie found a vendor selling flavored honey and negotiated a sample of 4 different kinds with a seriousness that the vendor found charming enough to permit. They ate lunch at a table outside a place that had been there since Nolan was 23 and still had the same menu, which he found reassuring in a way he couldn't fully explain. Lena slept through lunch, which Celeste said was a trap, that she would be awake from 8 p.m. until midnight to compensate. "That's a strategy," Nolan said. "She has several," Celeste said. "She's very strategic for someone with no object permanence." Maisie had ordered a grilled cheese and was eating it with the focused satisfaction of someone who had found their comfort food early in life. She looked up. "I can babysit when I'm older," she told Celeste. "I know how. Helen taught me." "Helen taught you to babysit?" Nolan said. "She taught me the basics," Maisie said with dignity. Celeste caught Nolan's eye over the table, and there it was. The shared look, the one that belonged to 2 people who had known each other long enough to have a whole conversation in a single glance. The warmth of it, and the history of it, and the present tense reality of sitting at a table in August with 2 daughters between them, one of whom was asleep in a carrier, and one of whom was explaining babysitting basics she'd received from a 70-year-old retired woman. Nolan looked at Celeste and she looked at him, and neither of them said anything, because nothing needed to be said. Not yet, maybe not for a while. Some things had to be lived into. You couldn't just decide them. Autumn came, the kind Denver specialized in, sudden, golden, apologetic about the summer being over. The Grant Ellison case moved through its phases in the background, the way legal things do, occasionally surfacing in the business section of the Post, each development a little less dramatic than the last. By October, 3 of his investment partners had cooperated with the federal investigation, and the portrait of what he'd built, and what he'd built it on, became visible to people who'd been choosing not to see it. His legal team was occupied. His public profile was occupied with managing the contraction of a reputation that had been constructed as carefully as any building he'd developed. Nolan read the articles when they came up and felt nothing much. That surprised him slightly. He'd expected something, satisfaction or anger or some version of "I told you so" directed at the universe. What he felt was closer to relief on her behalf, and a faint sadness for the waste of it. A man with real ability and real intelligence who had organized his entire inner world around the project of ownership. It was its own kind of poverty. Celeste didn't bring Grant up much. When she did, it was practical. An update from Karen, a development in the business untangling, a question about documentation. She'd learned something her therapist had worked with her on, to separate the facts of a situation from the feelings it generated, to give each their own room. The facts of Grant could be handled in a phone call to Karen. The feelings about him belonged in the other room, the Tuesday morning room, the 50-minute room with the good chair and the plant in the corner. She told Nolan about this distinction one evening in September in his kitchen, which she had come back to, not with the same pattern as before. Not the thin excuses, not the avoidance dressed as visiting. She came because she wanted to and said so, which was new and also felt somehow like the most natural thing. She came on a Saturday afternoon with Lena in the carrier and a bag of bronze-cut rigatoni, and a look on her face that was simply and directly, "I want to be here." Maisie received Lena like a small dignitary. She had prepared for this visit by rearranging Gerald the plant to a more prominent position, and by making, with absolute seriousness, a small sign that said "Welcome Lena" in purple marker, spelled incorrectly but constructed with clear intent. "It's welcome," Nolan said. "I know," Maisie said. "But Lena is unique, so her welcome is unique." He did not have a rebuttal for this. Lena, for her part, regarded the apartment with the dark-eyed attentiveness of a 3-month-old discovering that the world had more textures than she'd previously been exposed to. She found the overhead light interesting. She found Maisie's face very interesting. She found Gerald the plant adequate. They made pasta. All of it. The garlic, the olive oil, the one burned piece, the sound, the every single time, the it seasons, the oil, the that is not a thing. Maisie, who had been present for enough of this routine to have formed opinions, sided with Celeste on the garlic question and informed Nolan that the science was not on his side, which she'd apparently verified at some point. "You researched this?" he said. "I research things," Maisie said. "It's important." Lena made a sound from the bouncer they'd set up on the kitchen floor, and all three of them looked at her, and she seemed satisfied by the attention and settled back into her bouncer with the gravity of someone who has made her point. They ate. All of them at the small kitchen table, slightly crowded, Lena and the bouncer beside it, Maisie with her excessive parmesan, Celeste with her tea in the blue mug, Nolan with his coffee in whatever mug was cleanest. It was nothing like the quiet midnight suppers of October. It was louder and more chaotic, and Maisie knocked over her water glass at some point, and Lena decided the middle of dinner was an excellent time to express opinions, and Celeste got up to pick her up and ate the rest of her pasta one-handed while rocking the baby against her shoulder, and it was all deeply, irreducibly ordinary. It was also, Nolan thought, watching Celeste talk to Maisie with Lena on her shoulder, the pasta half finished, the overhead light doing its thing, Gerald the plant in his prominent position. It was also, without question, the best dinner he'd had in years. October came back around, the first anniversary of the midnight knock. He didn't mark it on a calendar. He just knew. The way you know things that have changed the shape of your life. Not dramatically, not all at once, but over time. The slow geological way that real changes happen. Celeste called on a Sunday evening. Lena was 4 months old and had recently discovered her own hands, which she was treating as a major scientific development. "I want to ask you something," Celeste said, "and I want you to answer honestly." "Okay." "And I want you to answer for yourself. Not for me, not for Maisie, or Lena, or any of the other things we'd be thinking about. For you." "Okay," he said again, more carefully. "How do you feel about all of this? About me?" A pause. "About us, if that word applies." He was quiet for a moment. Not because he didn't know, because he wanted to give it the honesty she was asking for. I love you, he said. I think I've loved you consistently for about 8 years, which includes the years you were gone and the years you were back and all the months in between. I don't know what to do with that most of the time. I just keep being where I am, and it keeps being true. A long silence. My therapist says, Celeste started, then stopped. What does your therapist say? She says that for the first time since she's known me, I'm making choices from clarity instead of from fear. She says I've been doing that for a few months now, consistently, and she's not going to tell me what those choices should look like, but she says the quality of the choosing has changed. And what are you choosing? Another silence. He waited. I'm choosing you, she said. If that's something you still... Celeste, I know you just said, I just wanted to... I know what you wanted, he said. To say it yourself. To choose it out loud from your own ground. Yes. A breath. Exactly that. He felt something settle in him, finally and without drama, the way things settle when they've been waiting a long time in a quiet room. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. That's all? That's everything, he said. That's the whole thing. She didn't move in right away. They didn't do it fast. There was still the Capitol Hill apartment, which had become genuinely hers, which she'd filled with her own things and painted one wall a color she'd chosen herself. There was still Tuesday mornings on Colfax at the Steinway, and therapy, and Lena's pediatric appointments, and the music studio she'd been slowly building, not just for lessons, but for composition, for the piece that still didn't have a name. They were together, and they were careful about it, and careful here meant deliberate rather than fearful. Nolan drove to Capitol Hill and made dinner in her small kitchen where things were in different places, and he had to ask where the pasta pan was. She came to Federal Boulevard and fit back into the rhythms of that kitchen, the way she always had, with Lena in the bouncer, and Maisie at the table, and Gerald the plant observing. Maisie accepted all of it with the serenity of someone who had predicted it and was too polite to say so. Patricia Pierce, upon being told, said, "Well, it's about time," with the tone of someone who had been waiting to say this for approximately 11 months. Marcus said, "Is it?" And Nolan said, "Ask me in 6 months." And Marcus said he was going to stop asking because the answer kept being yes. Karen Solus sent a card. It said, "Make good choices. You've gotten good at it." 3 sentences again. The woman was ruthlessly efficient. Oh, in March, the lease on Capitol Hill came up for renewal, and Celeste stood in her apartment and looked at it and thought about what she wanted. She called Nolan. "The lease is up," she said. "I know," he said. "You mentioned." "I'm thinking about not renewing it." He waited. "The thing is," she said, "Lena is going to need more space, and Maisie..." She paused. "Maisie asked me last week if Lena was going to be her sister. I told her Lena was her friend, and she looked at me like I'd said something politely incorrect." "She does that look well," Nolan said. "She does." A pause. "I'm not asking you to. I don't want to assume. I want to ask." "You can ask," he said. "Can we..." She stopped, tried again. "I want to come home," she said. Quietly, directly. No sideways. He sat with that word for a moment. Home. Not back. Not to try again. Home. Like it was a place that had existed and she'd been away from it, and now she was asking to return, not to the same version of it that they'd had before, but to the thing it was now, larger and more complicated, and with 2 daughters and a piano that would require a bigger apartment and a mug on a shelf. "Yeah," he said. "Come home." They found a place in late March. 3 bedrooms, ground floor, a house in the Highlands neighborhood that had a small yard and a kitchen with actual counter space, and a room that Celeste immediately designated as the music room, which would hold the piano that came out of storage in April. Moving day was chaotic in the specific way of moving days that involve a 7-year-old with opinions and a 10-month-old who needed feeding at the exact moment the couch needed to be carried through the front door. Marcus came to help, and spent most of the day redirecting Maisie from helpfully unpacking boxes in the wrong rooms. Patricia Pierce arrived at noon with food, the way she always did, because food was her primary love language, and she saw no reason to change that. At one point in the afternoon, in the middle of the kitchen boxes, Celeste picked up the blue-rimmed mug and looked at it. She held it for a moment, both hands, the way she always had, like taking its temperature. Then she looked at the second shelf of the new cabinet, which had already been designated the coffee mug shelf, and she put the mug there. And then she went to one of her boxes, the one labeled Studio/Mutz in her handwriting, and she opened it and removed something wrapped in a dish towel, and she unwrapped it carefully. A second blue-rimmed mug. Same faded blue rim, same slightly uneven glaze, same general character of something that had been found rather than bought new. The handle was intact, no chip, which was the only meaningful difference. She'd found it at an estate sale in November, 3 months after Lena was born, on a Saturday morning when her mother had Lena for a few hours, and she'd been driving without a destination and had ended up at a house in Park Hill where a family was clearing out their grandmother's things. The mug had been in a box of kitchen items priced at 50 cents. She'd paid 50 cents. She'd brought it home and put it in the cabinet and not told anyone, not even Nolan, not yet, because she'd needed to know for herself first what it meant, to know that she was choosing it and not just repeating a gesture someone else had started. She put the second mug on the second shelf beside the first. 2 mugs, faded blue rim, uneven glaze, one with a chip, one without. Nolan had come into the kitchen for something. Tape, he thought, or a box cutter. And he saw her standing there looking at the shelf, and he stopped. He looked at the 2 mugs. He looked at her. She looked at him with the same expression she'd had that first October night, standing at his door in the cold, except the uncertainty was gone now, replaced by something that had been built from the inside out, something that was entirely hers. "I found it at an estate sale," she said. "Park Hill, November." "How much?" 50 cents. He looked at the 2 mugs on the shelf for a long moment. "It has personality," he said. "No chip," she said. The chip was the personality. "The other one has enough for both." He looked at her. She looked back. Then Maisie appeared in the kitchen doorway with a very urgent question about where her box of books had gone, which turned out to be in the hallway where she'd put it herself 20 minutes ago. And the moment broke the way moments do, cleanly and without damage, because they had time now. They were not in a hurry, and they had the rest of the unpacking to do. The music room took a week to organize around the piano, which was its own argument with physics. When it was finally right, Celeste sat down at the bench and played. She played the piece that didn't have a name yet, the one that moved and circled and repeated a phrase in slightly different forms each time. He stood in the doorway and listened, and she'd gotten further with it. The bridge that used to stop and start was smoother now, not perfect, but navigated. There was a new section near the end that hadn't existed the night he heard it in Cherry Creek, something quieter and more certain. When she finished, she sat for a moment with her hands on the keys. Lena, in her play gym on the floor beside the piano, made a small sound of either enthusiasm or complaint. It was hard to tell, at 10 months, which one she intended. "She's reviewing your work," Nolan said from the doorway. "She's a tough critic," Celeste said. She looked down at Lena. "Well?" Lena grabbed her own foot, which was her response to most of life's larger questions. "She likes it," Maisie said, from somewhere behind Nolan in the hallway. "She grabbed her foot. That means she likes it." "When did you become a Lena translator?" Celeste asked. "I've been studying her," Maisie said with full sincerity. "She has a system." Nolan looked at Celeste, and she looked at him, and Lena grabbed her foot again, and Maisie explained the foot-grabbing taxonomy in further detail. And it was loud and imperfect and slightly chaotic. And the piano was slightly too big for the room, and the second mug was on the shelf in the kitchen, and outside the Highlands neighborhood was doing its ordinary thing, indifferent and ongoing. The piece still didn't have a name, but Celeste thought, sitting at the piano in the room that was hers, in the house that was theirs, listening to Maisie explain the foot-grabbing system to anyone who would listen, she thought maybe she was getting close. Things don't get names until you know what they are. She was starting to know. What this story is in the end, is not a love story in the way love stories are usually told, with the dramatic reunion and the earned kiss and the sense that difficulty was a tunnel you passed through rather than a place you actually lived. It's something less tidy than that. It's a story about two people who broke something real and spent years on either side of the break and found their way back, not because love conquered anything, but because they both, separately and at great cost, became people who could finally hold it. Celeste had to stop translating for a man who saw her as an acquisition before she could see herself clearly. Nolan had to learn the difference between being steady and being invisible, between patience and erasure of self. Neither of them were the same people who'd stood in a kitchen on Colfax at 26 and 27, convinced they'd figured something out. They'd figured out almost nothing back then. They were still figuring. But that, maybe, is the whole point. You don't arrive at a life. You build it, imperfectly, with the wrong tools sometimes, burning the first piece of garlic, oversalting the water, using too much Parmesan. And if you're fortunate, not lucky, but fortunate in the way that comes from doing the hard work of becoming someone worth coming back to, you find yourself in a kitchen with the right person, in a house that is actually home, with 2 mugs on the shelf and 2 daughters and a piano in the next room playing a song that is still finding its name. That's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything.